Chapter 1600. In order to stop the little fellow's cries, head steward Heimu even did something as unstylish as crawling on the ground like a turtle. Only then did the little fellow's loud cries turn into small sobs, perhaps because he had cried for too long. The little fellow was also tired. He fell asleep before the sky even turned dark. Head steward Heimu finally breathed a sigh of relief. He carried the little fellow back to his room and placed him on his bed. Unexpectedly, he woke up again as soon as he was put down. As soon as he woke up, he cried for his mommy and wanted to sleep in her room. Head steward Heimu was so annoyed by the little fellow's tantrum that his mommy wouldn't want him anymore. If he cried again, she would completely abandon him. She wouldn't see him for the rest of her life. This sentence was very effective. The little fellow finally stopped crying and obediently stayed in head steward Heimu's room. Perhaps the little fellow's Shin-Juli genes were too strong. He had a slight obsession with cleanliness. Head steward Heimu's bed was so clean, but he still disliked it. After he was put on it, he refused to crawl under the covers. He couldn't scold him either. If he did, he would cry. Head steward Heimu had no choice but to have a new bed made and new bedding. Only then did the little fellow reluctantly crawl under the covers and fall asleep. Head steward Heimu was tormented by him for a day. It was more tiring than climbing a mountain for a day. He still had a lot of work to do, so after the little fellow fell asleep, he went out to do his work. After a few hours, he dragged his tired body back to find that the little ancestor on the little bed was gone. He clearly knew how important the little fellow was to the Devil Master. In his panic, he had no choice but to search desperately. Fortunately, he still remembered that the little fellow wanted to sleep with his mother, so he came here with the intention of giving it a try. He didn't expect to find the little fellow and the Devil Master to come back. Seeing the Devil Master's unkind expression, he could only kowtow and apologize. He briefly explained what had happened. Imo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pursed his lips and didn't know what to feel. He reprimanded head steward Heimu and ordered him to do a few things. Only then did he carry the little fellow into his room. The little fellow had clearly jumped out of a stone. He could talk and run as soon as he was born and even knew how to fight. This kind of child would be a strange existence in any of the 6 realms. Imo thought that children like him were the strongest, but he didn't expect him to fall sick and have a fever. After entering the bedroom, Shin-Yinma finally knew that he would not be thrown out. He breathed a sigh of relief. Children always like to sleep. Moreover, he had been busy the whole day. Coupled with his illness, he almost fell asleep when Gu Shijio put him on the bed. Perhaps he was afraid of being left alone. Even though he was half asleep, his little hand was still tightly gripping Imo's sleeve. Imo had wanted to give him some medicine, but as soon as she got up and tugged at her sleeve, he burst into tears again. His 2 little hands flailed in the air as he cried for his mommy. This child was extraordinarily insecure. Imo's eyes also stung slightly. He had no choice but to carry him, find him some medicine, and feed him. Shin-Yinma was a good boy. As long as his mother carried him, he would not struggle. No matter how bitter the medicine was, he could swallow it with a frown. Imo massaged him once more, tossing and turning for a full 2 hours before he was finally covered in sweat. The little fellow's physical fitness was still very strong. After sweating, his high fever finally subsided. He was probably exhausted. Once the fever subsided, he fell asleep very quickly. Imo lay next to him. The little fellow was like a dogskin plaster, sticking close to her as he slept. Chapter 1601. What happened today must have traumatized him. Even in his deep sleep, he would occasionally sob and murmur, "Nyenma will be a good boy. Mommy, don't lose Nyenma." His big head snuggled in her arms before he could continue to sleep. Imo opened his eyes and looked at the top of the bed. His eyes were flickering with uncertainty. She raised her hand to touch her forehead. Intuitively, she felt that her carefree life was coming to an end. This little guy had only been with her for a day, but he had already become her weakness. She turned to look at the child beside her and carefully observed his eyebrows and eyes. She had already treated his eyes. The swelling had gradually subsided and returned to its original appearance. At this moment, his eyelashes were still a little playful. They covered his eyes and formed a dense silhouette, which made people want to kiss them. Suddenly, she smiled gently. If your child was still alive, he should be as cute as him. Somewhere in her heart, there was a sudden pain. It was as if a long-sealed scar had been exposed. She touched her chest with her fingers. She did not know who she was trying to persuade. Silly. That child is not meant to be with you. Let it go. Only by letting it go can you be free. Haven't you lived a good life for the past 3 years? She felt inexplicably impetuous in her heart. She pursed her lips tightly. She looked at her fingertips and realized that her spell seemed to be a little ineffective. Perhaps she should strengthen it? She closed her eyes, and a faint red light appeared on her fingertips. Once again, she suppressed the inexplicable emotions in her heart and suppressed them to the corner of her memory. She did not want them to come back again. When the red light disappeared, her beautiful face finally returned to its usual calmness. She smiled with satisfaction and fell into a deep sleep. There was a sea of people. It was a splendid sight. The engagement ceremony between the Devil Lord and the most powerful hermit in the Celestial Kingdom naturally shocked the entire 6 realms. Early in the morning, the inside and outside of Mo Palace was already a world of people. People from all 6 realms came and went in and out of the palace. Almost all the leaders of the 6 realms were present. The Devil Lord liked peace and quiet and didn't like too much noise and excitement. Therefore, the people who could enter the Mo Palace to congratulate the Devil Lord were all of relatively high status. Those whose ranks were too low would at most send their gifts to the door before they were sent away. The place where the engagement ceremony was held was not a palace, but a large square paved with jade. The plaza could hold thousands of people. At this moment, a jade platform was erected in the middle of the plaza. This platform was made of red agate, and it shone brightly under the sunlight. Around the high platform, there were countless seats arranged according to rank and color. The seats were divided into 6 colors, and the guests from the 6 realms were seated in their respective seats. The immortal realm sat in the white row, the devil realm sat in the red row, the ghost realm sat in the black row, the demon realm sat in the green row, the human realm sat in the blue row, and the beast realm sat in the yellow row. At the very front of each row were the leaders of the various realms. If one were to look down from the sky, the 6 colors were neat and orderly. It was a magnificent sight. When it was almost noon, there were no empty seats in the square. Nearly 10,000 people had gathered there. The scene could no longer be described as shocking. In this engagement ceremony, some people were happy, while others were sad. The immortal world was relieved and happy, while the devil world was elated. As for the other 4 realms, some were indifferent. For example, the human realm and the ghost realm. Whether the immortal realm and the devil realm were like family or like fire and water, it had nothing to do with them. They were just there to watch. The honorable emperor of the human realm did not receive any special treatment when he came here. He even had to act according to the mood of others. Chapter 16:02. On the other hand, the demons and beasts were a little worried. They were afraid that after the immortals and demons joined forces, they would come to deal with them. Their days might be even more difficult. Whether they were willing or not, they still had to participate in this event. When the bell rang in the distance, the ceremonial officer on the high platform finally shouted, "Venerable Linghua has arrived." Venerable Linghua was Yi Tianli's title. He rode a hexagonal red-flamed beast and floated down, standing on the high platform. As soon as he landed, he won the cheers of the guests around him. Because it was an engagement, although he did not need to wear the red groom's red robe, he wore a purple robe to show the importance of this event. His appearance was unusually handsome, with sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a high nose and thin lips, and a white jade hairpin on his head. Purple represented luxury, and his purple robe was specially made. It had wide sleeves, and when it was opened, it looked like a purple cloud. A white jade pendant hung on his belt, shining brightly. In order to control the situation, he released his rare aura. The immortal aura on his body was awe-inspiring, and there seemed to be auspicious light lingering around his body. The moment he landed, it seemed that the coral-red high platform beneath him had lost its color. Although he looked like a man in his 20s, everyone knew that his actual age was more than 10,000 years old. His martial arts were top-notch in the immortal world, not below the Celestial Emperor. Coupled with his handsome appearance, no matter where he went, he could cause a sensation. At this moment, there were many unmarried girls below the stage. When they saw him like this, many of them were already starry-eyed. The girls from the demon world were more shrewish, and they had already started cheering loudly. Yi Tianli's thin lips curved slightly. He was obviously used to this scene. Neither servile nor overbearing, he bowed in a circle and said some polite words that could only be said in such an occasion. His voice was as clear as jade, and it reverberated throughout the square, pushing the atmosphere of the scene to a climax. Yi Tianli was calm on the surface, but he was still a little proud in his heart. Not everyone could handle this kind of situation. Look at the Celestial Emperor. When he looked at him, there seemed to be a light of envy in his eyes. The Demon Lord was the ruler of this world. To be able to marry her was a challenge and a pride. In the entire 6 realms, she was probably the only one who could match him. His suave attitude naturally won him another wave of cheers. Everyone was quite excited. After all, such a grand event was not something that could be seen every year. Everyone couldn't help but look towards the depths of Mo Palace. She wondered how the Devil Lord, who had been in the limelight recently, would dress up this time. What kind of demeanor would he have? Although the Devil Lord had been reincarnated for 3 years, she had not shown her face much in public, and the number of people who had seen her face was even fewer. Although there were rumors describing her appearance, seeing was better than hearing 100 times. Everyone still wanted to see for themselves. Just as everyone was waiting expectantly, the ceremonial officer shouted again, "The Devil Lord has arrived." His shouts resounded through the sky, and even the white clouds floating in the sky seemed to tremble. Everyone looked in a certain direction, and then their eyes widened. A woman in red arrived on a cloud. The red-clothed girl looked to be around 13 or 14 years old. She was wearing a simple red dress. She didn't ride a flashy divine beast, nor did she wear any luxurious accessories. Her beautiful hair fluttered in the wind, and her red dress fluttered behind her. Chapter 1603. She was extremely beautiful. She was so beautiful that there was no trace of anger in her. Although she still had a childish appearance, she had the charm of an adult woman. However, these were not the most important things. The most important thing was that she was carrying a delicate child in her arms. The baby looked to be only a few months old. He was wearing a small robe of the same color as her. His pair of big eyes seemed to be able to speak as he blinked. Many people in the world knew that the great Devil Master liked children, but they heard that she liked children who were around 6 or 7 years old. Most of the children in her palace were around this age. They did not expect that she would carry such a small child today. The woman in red fluttered her sleeves and landed on the high platform. Mo, Yi Tianli walked over and reached out to hold her hand, only to find that she was carrying the child in both hands. He could not help but feel a little embarrassed. Mo usually doted on the child, but now was the big day of the engagement. It was not appropriate for her to carry a child. "Greetings, great Devil Master." Except for the emperors, everyone else got up and knelt. Mo looked around and lazily said, "Rise." Her voice was cold and crisp. Everyone got up and sat down. The ceremonial officer stepped forward and asked, "Great Devil Master, shall we proceed with the ceremony?" Mo nodded. Yi Tianli stood side by side with her and sent a directed audio to her. "Mo, can you let the others carry the child first?" Mo smiled lazily. "I can carry the child myself. I don't need anyone else." She reached out and pinched Nianma's face. "Isn't that right, little thing?" She said this sentence in a normal tone. Shin Nianma immediately held on Mo's arm and stared at Yi Tianli vigilantly. "Yes. I only want my mother. You are a bad guy. Don't even think about separating us." The little guy's voice was unusually loud. Almost everyone in the audience heard it. Everyone's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. Mother. In this continent, this was not a title that could be used casually. Only biological children could use it. Did the Great Devil Master have a son? Or was it because the Great Devil Master and Yi Tianli could not control their feelings for each other these days? But it didn't seem right. The child seemed to be very wary of Yi Tianli. It didn't seem like his. Yi Tianli naturally knew what everyone was thinking. He coughed lightly and smiled. I know that this child was born from a stone. His origin is strange. It's not strange that you treat him as a treasure. I like him too. After we get married, I'll treat him like my own. It sounded like a passionate confession, but in fact, it indirectly explained the origin of Shen Yanma to the people. Only then did everyone come to a sudden realization and stop making wild guesses. However, looking at the child, they all felt that it was rare. Nurtured in the stone? Wouldn't that mean he was born from heaven and earth? Normally, this kind of child was a genius who could seize the good fortune of heaven and earth. The celestial emperor of the celestial world stared intently at the child. He could vaguely see a faint light enveloping the child's body. That light was like a celestial, yet not celestial, like a demon, yet not a demon. It was very strange. The celestial emperor really wanted to take a good look at this child. He stood up and bowed to the Devil Master. Devil Master, why don't you let me hold this child for you first? It would be inconvenient to hold him during the engagement ceremony.
No.
I don't want an uncle to hold me. I only want my mother to hold me, Shen Yanma immediately said. The celestial emperor was speechless. He still looked like a young man. How did he become an uncle? Chapter 1604. The celestial emperor was speechless. He still looked like a young man, right? How did he become an uncle? Mo casually said, it is just a ceremony. I can handle it if you want to carry him. The little guy cried so much yesterday, and today, he kept clinging to her and insisted that she carry him. It was rare for her to feel guilty about the child, so she carried him. She did not take the engagement ceremony seriously. It was just a formality. Carrying the child was nothing. She did everything according to her heart. If she liked it, she would do it. If she did not like it, she would not do it. She did not have the concept of good and evil. Since she was so insistent, no one dared to force her. Although Yi Tianli was unhappy, he could not say anything else. He looked up at the sky and gently said, Mo, shall we start? Mo nodded. Okay. Yi Tianli immediately signaled to the officiator. The officiator nodded and went to prepare. Shen Yanma was anxious. He looked around desperately. Why was his father not here yet? If his father did not come, his mother would not want him anymore. The engagement ceremony in this continent was different from other places. They needed to worship the heavens and earth. They also needed to pour the rootless water into the wine glass. The man and woman who were going to be engaged had to drip their blood into the glass and mix it with the wine. The man and woman shook the glass together. When the liquid in the glass was completely mixed, they used a spell to pour the wine on the ground. The bigger the area, the better. Yi Tianli felt that with his and Mo's kung fu, the wine would definitely turn into a rain of wine. It would be the best story in history. During the engagement ceremony, the fresher the rootless water, the better. It was best to get it on the spot at the beginning of the ceremony. That would be perfect. The rootless water could be collected by the officiator or by the man himself. It depended on the man's kung fu. This time, Yi Tianli naturally wanted to collect it himself. The officiator brought him a jade container that was specially used to collect the rootless water. The container was specially made. It was green like jade, and the shape was also antique. Yi Tianli took it in his hand and raised it high above his head. Under his sleeve, he cast a spell and murmured. After a while, clouds began to accumulate above his head, gradually forming a rain cloud. After a while, rain finally fell from the rain cloud. As the rain continued to fall, Yi Tianli spun in the air to catch the falling raindrops. In less than half a cup of tea's time, he finally caught half of the jade container. When he caught the raindrops, his movements were graceful, and his purple robe swayed, earning him another round of applause. Admiration flashed in the eyes of the praising officer, who often presided over ceremonies. He often caught this kind of rootless water, but in order to summon the rain clouds, it would take at least the time of an incense stick to burn for the raindrops to fall. Moreover, he could not catch all the raindrops that fell, so some of them would fall on the host's high platform. However, not a single drop fell from Yi Tianli. There was not a single drop of rain on the ground either. Other than the fact that there was a little too much rootless water in the jade container, there were no other flaws. It was perfect. Yi Tianli stood still. He looked at the cup calmly and smiled. Imo, I did not disappoint you. She slowly walked to Amo's side. We can begin now. He flicked his fingertip, and a drop of blood flew high into the air and fell into the wineglass-shaped container. Amo's eyes fell on the cup. She slightly hesitated. She raised her fingertip and was about to flick a drop of blood when Shen Nianma, who was in her arms, suddenly sneezed. Chapter 16:05. Apparently, Yi Tianli was not prepared for this. He was waiting for Amo's blood to drip into the glass, so he could not avoid it and let a few drops of saliva into the glass. Shen Nianma's sneeze was so powerful that it even made the liquid in the glass ripple. Yi Tianli was speechless. Mo was speechless. All the guests were speechless. Yi Tianli's hand that was hidden in his sleeve was trembling. He was willing to bet that this kid did it on purpose. His handsome face was a little pale, but he could not lose his temper in front of a child in public. Shen Nianma looked at him innocently and even rubbed his nose with his little hand. He muttered, "My nose is itchy." Mo raised her hand to touch his forehead. It was cool, and there were no signs of fever. She looked at the kid again and saw that he had already hugged her neck and put his head on her neck. He rubbed his head against her neck and said, "Mother, I feel dizzy." This kid's little face was tender, and his soft breath blew on her neck, making her heart warm. She wanted to scold him, but she swallowed back her words. Instead, she raised her hand and patted his back. "Be good." Yi Tianli could not say anything else at this time. The liquid needed to be worshipped and could not be blasphemed. There was a child's saliva in the glass, so it was considered dirty and could not be used again. He had to pour the liquid away and use the cleaning spell to clean the glass. Then he cast the spell again. Shen Nianma was still in his mother's arms. He was still very anxious. Where did his father go? Why was he not here yet? If he delayed any longer, the bad man who wanted to take his mother away would make the second glass. He could not sneeze again, could he? Moreover, Yi Tianli would certainly be prepared. He was afraid that the same trick would not work. Should he wait for Yi Tianli to bring the glass again and pee when he was not prepared? But he was not wearing open-crotch pants. Shen Nianma was very troubled. He thought about it again and decided not to care anymore. If he could not do it, he would pee. Although he would wet his pants, his mother's clothes would also be wet. She had virgin urine on her body, so he could not hold the damn ceremony again. It was just a little embarrassing to wet his pants in public. Shen Nianma felt that he was going all out for the sake of the reunion of the three of them in the future. Just as he was desperately trying to come up with a bad idea, Yi Tianli finally finished his second cup. This time, he was obviously on guard against Shen Nianma. After he dripped his own blood into the bowl, he deliberately leaned to one side when he brought the bowl to Mo. He pinched his fingertips to prevent the little guy from sneezing again. Mo, it's done this time. Come, drip your blood in too. From now on, we're husband and wife. Mo raised his finger. Shen Nianma immediately closed his eyes and was about to urinate.
Chi.
A soft sound was heard. A white light flew out of nowhere and hit Yi Tianli's wine glass.
Pa.
The wine cup instantly shattered into a pile of dregs that couldn't be picked up. Yi Tianli was speechless. Why was there so much trouble today? He suddenly raised his head and shouted angrily, "Who is it?" Everyone was also shocked by the sudden appearance of the white light. The speed of the white light was too fast. Even with so many people present, no one could see where the white light came from. "It's me." A voice came from the clouds. The voice was as cold as snow and as clear as jade. A short word was like an ice bead that heavily plucked the strings of everyone's heart. Chapter 1606. It's me. A voice came from the clouds. That voice was as cold as snow and as clear as jade. That one word was like an ice bead that plucked at everyone's heartstrings. Following this voice, a white figure floated down from the sky. Jade as the spirit, snow as the bones, clouds as the clothes, and the moon as the face. When the white figure landed on the high platform, it was as if the whole world had become cool. His wide white robe fluttered behind him like a cloud, and his ink-black hair fluttered like a curtain. A deep sapphire headband was faintly discernible in his hair. He landed there calmly, and the beauty of his facial features seemed to be unable to be described with words. His eyes were like the waves of the sea, and his thin lips were like a cloud of peonies. Every curve was perfect. When his eyes turned, it was as if the waves of the sea were gently patting him. Everyone who looked at him felt their hearts beat up and down like a drum. He just casually glanced down, but everyone felt like they were being stared at. The men all shivered, and the women all felt their hearts beat wildly. His temperament was extremely cold, like the clouds in the high sky, like the ice on the high mountains. He was just casually standing there, but he exuded a noble and lofty aura. This aura seemed to come from his bones, and even if people didn't know his identity, they would still have the urge to kneel down and worship him. Silence. Extreme silence. In the big square, there were nearly 10,000 people. At this moment, everyone was completely silent. Almost everyone held their breath. It was as if breathing out was blasphemous to the person on the high platform. No matter how bold a woman was, she would not dare to scream. When this person landed, everything in the world seemed to automatically become his background. General Manager, Himu stood below the stage with his mouth wide open. This person, where did he come from? He was not a guest at all. Although there were many guests and he could not recognize them all, such a superexistence would cause a sensation no matter where he appeared, right? It was impossible for him not to know. More importantly, he faintly felt that this person was a little familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. Yi Tianli's eyes fell on the man who suddenly appeared. His pupils shrank slightly. He had never seen this person before, but when he was on guard, he could still easily break the jade in his palm. This man's martial arts were not simple. It could almost be described as unfathomable. This person was obviously here to cause trouble, and in such a high-profile way. Yi Tianli's 2 consecutive drinks were ruined by someone, and he was in a bad mood. Especially when this man appeared and took away everyone's attention, it made him even more unhappy. Yi Tianli had always been good at self-restraint. As the First Lord in the Celestial Kingdom, it was necessary to have good self-restraint. Therefore, although he was very unhappy in his heart, he still showed a calm expression on his face. He was neither anxious nor impatient. "Who are you? What's the meaning of breaking my cup?" His voice was gentle and sharp. He stood there in his purple robe and subconsciously released his aura. He was not much weaker than the man in front of him. "Father. He is my father." Shen Nianma, who was in Amo's arms, finally called out. His crisp and soft voice echoed throughout the square. He was extremely excited. His father had finally arrived. He finally didn't need to use a virgin boy's urine to force his mother to go back and change clothes. He waved his little hands and was so happy that his eyes turned into crescent moons. He was so happy that he almost flew into the air. Yi Tianli was speechless. How could a child who jumped out of a rock have a father? Chapter 1607. Naturally, he did not take Shen Nianma's words to heart. He stared at the man in white and asked, "Who are you?" The man in white was Shan Juli. He smiled faintly and looked at Shen Nianma. "The child called me father." Shen Nianma added, "He is my biological father." He proudly raised his little head and hugged Amo's neck to ask again, "Isn't that right, mother?" Father, mother, child, these names were like a bomb that shocked everyone present. Everyone's expression could only be expressed with one word: 0. Yi Tianli paused and smiled. So, you are the child's godfather. It seems that when he was in the stone, you were the one who took care of him. This is nothing. May I know why you are here this time? Are you here to take the child back? He tried his best to smooth things over, trying to dissolve the increasingly strange atmosphere. Shinjuli was too lazy to pay attention to him. His eyes fell on Imo and smiled. It has been a long time since we last met. How have you been? His voice was soft and low, as pleasant as a guqin. It was also like the spring breeze blowing through the treetops. It warmed people's hearts in an instant. Imo tilted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were deep and clear like glass. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was as indifferent as usual. Who are you? After the sentence, the atmosphere became even more awkward. Everyone was guessing the man's identity and the cause of the whole incident. Naturally, at this time, everyone's gossipy cells began to be activated. They had already imagined a melodramatic drama. Shinjuli's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a flash of sadness in his eyes, but he smiled. You don't know? Well, there is still a long way to go. It is not too late for us to get to know each other again. His words were filled with an invisible domineering aura and determination to win, which made the people below the stage shocked again. Imo smiled lazily and was not moved. What qualifications do you have for me to get to know each other again? Shin Nianma quickly said, Mother, he is Nianma's father. He should also be your husband. Mother, you have to acknowledge him. He has worked very hard to find you for a long time. Nianma has also worked very hard. Although the boy's words could not be trusted, there was too much information contained in his somewhat incoherent words. Everyone felt that it would take them a while to digest. Imo looked at Shinjuli again and suddenly smiled. So, you're here to find a wife. Unfortunately, I'm not the one you're looking for. Although I was the one who delivered this child, he is not my flesh and blood. If he is indeed your child, you can take him with you. She handed Shin Nianma over to Gu Shijio. Shin Nianma's facial expression changed, and he cried again. He turned around and desperately held Imo's arm. Mother, do you always like to abandon me? Mother promised not to abandon Nianma again. His tears came as he wished, rolling down like pearls. Imo could be cruel to anyone, but she could not resist the tears of this little ancestor. She originally wanted to throw the little brat to the man who claimed to be his father, but when he cried, her heart softened slightly. She hesitated for a moment, and the little brat had already grabbed her arm. His two little hands held on tightly, and she couldn't shake him off even if she wanted to. She would have to use a spell, but she couldn't use it on this little brat. Therefore, the little ancestor naturally lay on her body again. He hugged her like a koala and could not be pulled away. Chapter 1608. This scene made the demon master lose a lot of face. Imo's calm mask almost cracked. Shut up. Don't cry. She yelled at him. Shen Nianma's little body trembled, and he looked at her with tears in his eyes. Mother, you are scolding me? His little mouth was pouting more and more, and his tears were about to turn into a downpour. Nianma, be a good boy. If you are a man, don't cry. Imo finally understood that children should not be scolded, especially this boy. Otherwise, he would cry until there was a river in the sky. She changed it to education. This sentence was almost blurted out. Shin Nianma was a docile donkey. Once his hair was smoothed, he was very obedient. The tears that were about to roll out of his eyes finally showed signs of recovery. Well, Mother has taught me before that only girls like to cry, and boys should be men. They bleed but not cry. It wasn't as if this brat didn't understand reason. Imo finally breathed a sigh of relief. It is good that you know. Don't cry. Shin Nianma rubbed his face against her chest. As long as you don't abandon me, I will not cry. I will be a man. This boy was not an ordinary person who changed the rudder according to the wind. He even knew how to threaten. Imo's head swelled from his rubbing. For a moment, he couldn't decide whether to continue throwing him out or not. She regretted bringing this boy to the scene. Hugging him in her arms, her dignity was almost gone. No matter how good Yi Tianli was, at this time, his handsome face was gloomy. He coughed softly. Mo, we don't have to care about irrelevant people. Let's continue with the engagement ceremony. Mo closed her eyes slightly. When she opened her eyes again, she was already at ease. She casually pointed at Shen Nianma's body a few times, and in front of Shen Nianma's big eyes, she encircled him in a light red wizardry barrier and suspended him behind her. She flicked her clothes as if she was trying to get rid of the irrelevant people and things. She smiled gently. Okay? Her smile was sweet, but there was an indescribable evil aura. It made people who saw her smile feel nervous. Yi Tianli finally let out a sigh of relief. As long as Mo agreed to marry him, everything else was fine. The celestial emperor of the celestial world finally reacted. He stood up and said, "That's right. Today is the big day of the Devil Lord and the Supremacy's engagement. Don't miss the auspicious time." In any case, the marriage between the immortal realm and the demon lord was the only way to bring peace to the 6 realms. As for the white-robed man who appeared later, although his bearing was also extraordinary, his origins were unknown. No one could even tell where he came from. The celestial realm naturally didn't want him to ruin this great marriage. Therefore, when the celestial emperor spoke, the people from the other immortal realms immediately agreed. This time, many people from the immortal realms had come to support the celestial emperor. Their agreement had a shocking effect. Yi Tianli straightened his back and glanced at Shen Juli proudly. He wanted to see if Shen Juli would restrain himself after being isolated. It would be best if Shen Juli left obediently. Shen Juli stood there. He didn't feel uneasy about being isolated in this world. His face was as calm as water. He looked down at the crowd and echoed loudly. His eyes were like ice water. Under the baptism of his gaze, those who were loudly echoing unconsciously lowered their voices. Finally, they all shut up. Shen Juli finally opened his mouth to speak after the restless voices had died down. Chapter 1609. He looked at Ning Xuema. I heard that the demon lord once said that she would marry the strongest person in the world. Everyone in the mythical continent knew this, so Mo did not deny it. That's right. Shen Juli smiled. He did not smile easily, but ever since he came to the stage, he had smiled more often than before. That's good, he said without hesitation. Then he looked at Yi Tianli. His voice was still as calm as water, but his words were no less than a bomb. Then you don't have to marry her. You are not the strongest. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, Yi Tianli could not hold it in even if he had good self-control. He sneered and his eyes turned cold. You have to take responsibility for what you said. I am the strongest person in the 6 realms, and I am recognized as the strongest person in the 6 realms. Someone immediately agreed. That's right. The Venerable One is the strongest in the 6 realms. He earned this title with his own strength, and it is not an undeserved reputation. Yes, I was there when he competed with the strongest person in the 6 realms. Yi Tianli looked at Shen Juli again and smiled. Everyone's eyes are sharp. What else do you have to say? Shen Juli asked. You said that I am not the strongest. Then who is the strongest? Shen Juli slowly tidied up his sleeves and replied faintly, I am. Yi Tianli sneered. I don't know where you came from. Who on this continent knows you? How can you be sure that you are the strongest? Shen Juli finally looked at him. Does being the strongest have anything to do with one's background? He then turned to Mo. The demon lord only said that she wants to marry the strongest person in the 6 realms, right? Did you specify that I need to verify my background? Mo pursed her lips. She replied indifferently, no. Shen Juli smiled. That's it. As long as Momo marries the strongest and I prove that I am the strongest, Momo will marry me, right? Mo. She couldn't deny it. The celestial arch below the stage couldn't hold himself back any longer. He stood up and asked, then how do you prove that you're the most powerful being? Shen Juli's gaze returned to Yi Tianli. Since he is the strongest person on this continent, wouldn't it be enough if I defeat him? Yi Tianli. Shen Juli looked down at him condescendingly. Or is Venerable Yi afraid to accept the challenge? Yi Tianli took a deep breath. He had been in this continent for many years, so he was not a rookie. He was not someone who could be intimidated by a few words. He raised his head slightly and chuckled. So you are here to cause trouble. It's not that I don't dare to accept the challenge, but today is the wedding day of my engagement with the Demon Lord. It's not that I don't want to fight, but today is the wedding day of my engagement with the Demon Lord. If Your Excellency wants to compete, why don't you wait for me to complete this ceremony before choosing another day to compete with Your Excellency? He was also very cunning. His words were not degrading, and he could continue to complete the engagement ceremony without being criticized by others. Shen Juli's lips curled up. How could he not see through Yi Tianli's scheme? Since the Demon Lord wants to be engaged to the strongest person, how can you complete this engagement ceremony now that your identity as the strongest person has not been confirmed? Do you take the Demon Lord's oath as a joke? Shen Juli did not bicker with others easily. In his opinion, it was best to act quickly. Chapter 16:10. Shen Juli was not one to bicker with others easily. In his opinion, the fastest way was to act. However, just because he did not want to bicker with others did not mean that he would not say anything. Once he opened his mouth, his words would be as straightforward as his personality. It would be impossible for others to ignore him even if they wanted to. Yi Tianli was speechless. He could not find the words to refute him. Shen Juli took another step forward. Or, do you think that you are no match for me and do not dare to accept the challenge? Yi Tianli took a deep breath and snorted. You are just trying to provoke me. I will not. He was about to marry his wife, and he did not want to add unnecessary variables. That's right, that's right. Venerable Yi is recognized as the strongest. There's really no need to waste time by competing with others. If at this time, a few people casually come up and say that they want to challenge Venerable Yi, wouldn't it be a mess? In my opinion, it is more important to hold the ceremony first. Don't miss the auspicious time. The Heaven Emperor also stood up for Yi Tianli. Are you afraid of missing the auspicious time? Shen Juli looked up at the sun that was about to move to the middle of the sky and smiled faintly. It won't be missed. He waved his sleeve and a faint white light instantly enveloped the entire place. After the white light dissipated, everyone stared at the hourglass not far away. The hourglass had stopped flowing and the treetops in the distance were tilted to one side, as if they were frozen. Everything that was moving came to a standstill in an instant. Even the rolling clouds in the sky stopped there, not moving at all. The only thing that could move was the people present. Everyone looked at each other, not understanding what had happened. The Heaven Emperor's eyes were almost fixed on Shen Juli. You are. Time has stopped, Shen Juli said slowly. Before the outcome of the battle is decided, the auspicious hour will not come. When he was with Ning Xuema, she unintentionally mentioned the movie You from the Stars that she watched in the modern world. She said that the professors in the movie were able to stop time. She only mentioned it at that time, but it aroused his interest. Therefore, he took Ning Xuema to travel and train her while studying the time-stop technique on his own. He was a god, and there were very few spells in this world that could truly baffle him. As long as he researched, there was no spell that he could not succeed. After he finished his research, he didn't even have time to show it off in front of Ning Xuema before the following incident happened now. He finally used it at such a crucial moment. His cold voice resounded throughout the entire place, causing everyone to be stunned. The leaders of the 6 realms looked at each other. The word shocks could be seen on their faces. There was no one on this continent who could use this technique.
Who was this man?
He actually knew such a powerful spell. Originally, they were still suspicious of Shen Juli's challenge to Yi Tianli. They thought that this person was just here to cause trouble and delay the auspicious hour. Now that he had revealed this move, everyone finally took it seriously. The leaders of the demon realm and the beast realm were eager to ruin this marriage, so they immediately said, "This brother's words are reasonable. Why don't Venerable Yi compete with this brother? That way, everyone will be convinced." Yes, the demon lord is marrying the strongest person. If Venerable Yi doesn't accept the challenge, I'm afraid people will not be convinced. Haha, yes, we haven't seen Venerable Yi show his skills for a long time. Anyway, time is still now, so there's no need to worry about missing the auspicious hour. Why don't Venerable Yi fight with his brother? Chapter 16:11. At this point, Yi Tianli could no longer find any other excuses. He looked at Shinjuli and said, "All right, I will fight. However, fists and kicks have no eyes. If I accidentally hurt you, please forgive me." Shinjuli was straightforward. Just do whatever you want. It had been a long time since he had a good fight with someone. A life without an opponent was a lonely life. Hopefully, Yi Tianli lived up to his title as the strongest person in the continent and could withstand a little beating. He had been unhappy with him for a long time. Almost everyone was excited to see a heavyweight fight at the engagement ceremony. Yi Tianli waved his hand, and the loose purple robe on his body was thrown to the side. Inside, he was wearing a tight green robe. It looked like he had slender shoulders and narrow buttocks, which made his body look even more slender and straight like a bamboo. Shinjuli rolled up his sleeves and tucked in the corner of his robe. He waved the jade flute in his hand and said, "What does the strongest person want to compete with?" Yi Tianli snorted and said, "Whether it's swordsmanship, spells, or even zither skills, I am willing to accompany you." Shinjuli's eyes flashed slightly. He discussed with him, "Why don't we compete with each other? No matter which one you win, you win. How about it?" Yi Tianli was speechless. He was also a very proud and conceited person. He had never met a real opponent on this continent. Of course, the Devil Lord was an exception. The Devil Lord was the ruler of this world. It was not embarrassing for him to lose to her. However, who was this man in white in front of him? He did not even know where he came from. Shinjuli's words were like a slap to his face. Yi Tianli said angrily, "Since I have agreed to compete with you, it must be fair. I don't need you to go easy on me. I just want to end this battle quickly. You can choose one." Shinjuli said calmly, "No matter what I choose, you won't stand a chance if it's decided in one battle." He looked at Yi Tianli from head to toe and finally looked at him. "What are you best at?" Yi Tianli was speechless. The person opposite him spoke calmly, but Yi Tianli felt deeply humiliated. There were people below the stage who liked to join in the fun. One of them, who was beaten up badly by Yi Tianli, immediately shouted, "Venerable Yi is best at swordsmanship." Shinjuli nodded. "Then let's go with the sword." Yi Tianli looked at the long sword hanging on Shinjuli's waist and smiled. "Are you going to use that sword to compete with me?" Shinjuli stroked the hilt of his sword and raised his eyebrows. "So what?" Yi Tianli smiled coldly. In this continent, there were many sword immortals who practiced sword arts. Anyone who had learned something would be able to cultivate an immortal sword. The immortal sword would change its size according to the person's will and could be placed anywhere. Only those who had yet to become immortals would wear swords on their bodies. Therefore, when Yi Tianli saw Shinjuli's outfit, he could not help but laugh. After all, he had lived in this continent for tens of thousands of years and was very knowledgeable. He could see that the sword hanging on Shinjuli's waist was indeed a sharp sword, but it was not an immortal sword. If Yi Tianli used this sword to compete with him, he could break it in minutes. Yi Tianli raised his hand, and a light flashed in his palm. A green glazed sword appeared out of nowhere. The sword was thin and sharp, shining like a lake under the sunlight. He smiled. "This is the sword that I used before I became immortal. Since you are using an ordinary sword, I will also use the worst one, lest you say that I took advantage of you." Chapter 16:12. Shinjuli glanced at his sword. Once he decided to fight, he spoke little. Whatever. No matter what his opponent's sword was, it would be destroyed anyway. The Sky Emperor suddenly spoke up. "Since you're here to fight for the title of the strongest, you should leave your name." Shinjuli raised his head and looked at Imo, who had been watching from afar. She looked calm and casual, as if she had nothing to do with the dispute that started because of her. Her gaze fell on him, without joy, sorrow, or hatred. It was as if she was looking at a stranger. She had no intention of speaking up for him. She stood there in her red dress. She was clearly in a sea of people, but she seemed to be isolated from the world. It was as if nothing in this world had anything to do with her. His heart twisted slightly. The two people who had once loved each other the most were now strangers. So this was what it felt like to be forgotten by the one you loved. He seemed to understand how Ning Xuema felt when he woke up and saw her again. Shun Jili. He spat out 3 words. No matter which world he was in, he would only remember this name. The Sky Emperor's expression changed. He stared at him with wide eyes. Yu, the story of the gods and demons had been lost for too long. Now, very few people in this world still remembered the names of the 2 gods and demons. Even at that time, the common people only called the pair of gods Supreme God and Demon Master. Very few people knew their real names. Occasionally, people would hear that the Demon Lord called himself Imo, but no one knew his real name. Although Imo had been reborn, she did not remember the events of tens of thousands of years ago. She only remembered that her nickname was Imo, so she called herself that. As for the Supreme God, only the Sky Emperor, the ruler of the immortal world, knew his real name. However, he only knew one word, and that was Li. He did not know anything else. Now, this man in white was called Shun Jili. Was he related to the Supreme God? Was he his descendant? Or was he the Supreme God himself?
No.
The Supreme God had also been immortalized in that great battle. The Devil Lord's rebirth shook the heavens and the earth. There was no reason why the rebirth of a God Lord would not cause any strange phenomena. The Sky Emperor stood there in bewilderment. He could not figure out Shun Jili's identity, but he began to worry for Yi Tianli. He lowered his eyes slightly and cupped his hands at the Devil Master. I wonder what the Devil Master thinks about the competition between these two? Imo crossed his arms and smiled lazily. I've already said that I will only marry the strongest. This vow will not change. Life is so boring. If there's a good show to watch, it'll relieve my boredom. Celestial Arch. He thought that the Demon Lord and Yi Tianli had been together for so long that they would have feelings for each other and would side with Yi Tianli. He did not expect that. Yi Tianli's face turned slightly pale, and his heart was a little bitter. He had been with her for more than a year, and yet he was unable to make her fall in love with him. It was also a failure. Shun Jili's gaze fell on Imo, and a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. He was not afraid of her hatred, nor was he afraid of her giving him a hard time. He was only afraid that she would treat him like a stranger if she still hated him. She would definitely not agree to this competition. In order to anger him, she might even stubbornly insist on marrying Shun Jili. At the very least, she would not agree to let Shun Jili marry her again, but she did not care now. Chapter 16:13. She had completely forgotten about him. The Sky Emperor coughed softly and said, "Since the Demon Lord has said so, it means that you agree to this competition. I think that in order to be fair, it's better to have 2 out of 3 rounds. We can't decide the winner in 1 round." Onlookers would never complain about too much trouble. As soon as he said this, everyone naturally agreed and wanted to watch a few more rounds. The Demon Lord, Imo, also seemed to be interested. She nodded and said, "Then let's have 2 out of 3 rounds." She had the highest status now, so this sentence naturally made the final decision. Yi Tianli was actually angry just now. That's why he said 1 round to decide the winner. He was also afraid that if the person in front of him was a sword master, he would lose and everything would be over. Originally, when he competed with other people, there were also several skills. The Demon Lord's husband naturally could not only be good at one. Shun Jili did not care about the number of rounds. He had lived for a long time and had studied almost everything. However, he had a bad habit. No matter what he learned, he wanted to be the best. He would only stop when there was no room for further research. Although he lost his memory once every few hundred years, he would not lose the skills he learned. Subconsciously, he would still do it. Therefore, there were very few things in this world that he did not know. Now that someone proposed 2 out of 3 rounds, he naturally had no objections. It was just a few more rounds of torture. He had no objections. Since the parties involved had no objections, this matter was settled. Since the heads of the 6 realms happened to be here, they just happened to be witnesses for these 2 people. The first round was naturally a sword competition. Even if they were to fight, it could not be held on the high platform where the engagement ceremony was held. Yi Tianli waved his hand and summoned the red flame beast. He flew into the air. His red flame beast was very majestic. When it flew into the air, it was like a cloud in the sky, extremely dazzling. Before the competition, he had already won a round of applause, especially the cheers from the immortal realm were louder. Shen Juli slowly rolled up his sleeves, then slowly looked at the people below the stage. He slowly flew into the air and finally stopped in front of the red flame beast. He glanced at the majestic red flame beast and praised, "This red flame beast is not bad." Yi Tianli gritted his teeth and laughed, "You flatter me." Shen Juli looked at him strangely. "I'm praising it, not you. You don't have to be modest for it." Yi Tianli, he didn't want to talk to this person anymore, in case he was angered to death. He raised his hand, and the treasured sword flew into the air with a swoosh. The tip of the sword spat out a sword ray that was about 3 feet long. His etiquette was still very thorough, and he also raised his sword in a starting position. He said in a deep voice, "Please." His starting stance was extremely standard, and extremely stylish. Those who knew swordsmanship cheered again. This was how a supremacy of the celestial world should be. You have the ability. Looking at Shen Juli again, he was standing there casually, looking very casual. He also pulled out his sword, but the way he held it was not up to standard. He casually held the sword, but he did not let it fly into the air, nor did he let it be held horizontally as a sign of respect. He held it more like he was holding an iron rod, and the tip of the sword was even hanging down. No need to be polite, let's fight. Yi Tianli was speechless. He had fought so many times, but this was the first time he met such an opponent who did not play by the rules. Especially the opponent's attitude. It was obvious that he did not take him seriously. Chapter 16-14. He was a venerable of the immortal world, while his opponent was just a white robe that popped out of nowhere. He did not even have an identity. Yi Tianli felt that it was beneath him to compete with him. Naturally, he would not make the first move. Moreover, he was very confident in his swordsmanship. After all, he had defeated countless swordsmen. God knows how many people cried for their parents. He now had the intention to kill Shen Juli. The more he wanted to kill, the more gentlemanly he would be. Therefore, he smiled slightly. "I will give you 3 moves. After 3 moves, he would be able to kill everyone. No one would say anything even if he turned this person into a human stick." Although Shen Juli did not have many opportunities to fight in his life, every fight he fought was shocking and earth-shattering. After so many fights, he had always been the one who gave others 3 moves. Now, someone actually wanted to give him a handicap. He felt that it was quite strange. He held his sword and looked at the first person who dared to eat crabs. "Do you really want to give me a handicap?" "Of course," Yi Tianli answered firmly. He squinted his eyes and looked at Shen Juli. He thought that Shen Juli would have a humiliated expression on his face, or that he would refute him angrily. If it was more intense, this opponent might proudly say that he would give him a handicap of 3 moves. Of course, the most gentlemanly way would be for Shen Juli to make 3 slashes in the air to show that his opponent gave him a handicap. Then, the fight would officially start. Yi Tianli felt that with Shen Juli's character, the possibility of him taking the last step was probably the highest. However, he obviously misjudged Shen Juli's attitude. Shen Juli did not have a trace of anger on his face. He even smiled and praised him. "You have courage. Then I won't hold back." He raised the sword in his hand and stabbed it out. His sword did not have any fancy movements. The only characteristic was that it was fast. It was unprecedentedly fast. Even lightning could not compare to his speed at this moment. Just as he finished speaking, the tip of the sword in his hand was already pointing at Yi Tianli's forehead. Shen Juli's sword did not even have a dazzling sword aura, but the murderous aura on the sword was sharper than the edge of the sword. Before the fierce sword aura even reached Yi Tianli's eyes, it had already caused him pain, as if his skin was being torn apart. Yi Tianli was indeed worthy of being called the strongest person in this continent. His reaction was not ordinary. When the opponent's sword was about to reach him, he subconsciously bent down. Suddenly, he felt a chill on the top of his head. The green jade hairpin on his head instantly broke into 2 pieces. His flowing hair instantly fell down like flowing water. This was because his reaction was extremely fast. If his reaction was slightly slower, his hair would have been shaved bald. He took a few steps back like flowing water, and his palms were already sweating. The strongest person on the continent had her hairpin severed in a single move. Everyone who was watching the battle below sucked in a breath of cold air. Almost everyone's eyes were focused on Shen Jiuli. Almost everyone present was an expert in martial arts. Naturally, they were able to see Shen Jiuli's move clearly. It was a very common move. Almost everyone present knew how to use it, but no one could achieve the same effect as Shen Jiuli. It was light and agile. It was indescribable. No one would have thought that this move could be used in such a way. It could also be so powerful. Good. Finally, someone shouted, "Father, cut him." Shen Nianma, who was trapped in the wizardry barrier, could finally speak. This was the first sentence that came out of his mouth. Imo glanced at him sideways. She was annoyed that he was too noisy, so she casually sealed his acupoints. Of course, the opponent was a child, so she was very gentle. She only sealed his acupoints slightly, but it did not affect his body. Chapter 16-15. Yi Tianli was very quiet after his acupuncture point was sealed. He sat in the enchantment without crying or making a fuss. He only opened his big eyes and watched the development of the situation outside. He was as obedient as a kitten. Mo was happy that Yi Tianli was finally obedient. He did not expect Yi Tianli to open his acupuncture point by himself. He even hurriedly shouted out such an important sentence. When Ning Xuema looked at him, he immediately sat up straight and pursed his lips. He was acting like an obedient child again. Of course, there were more people who were on Yi Tianli's side. At the very least, the immortal world shared the same hatred as him. Many people below shouted for him to be careful. Shen Jiuli automatically filtered out the voices below. He glanced at Yi Tianli. Your reaction is not slow. Shen Jiuli's comment was simple. Shen Jiuli rarely complimented others, so it was rare for him to praise Shen Jiuli. Yi Tianli's skill was still a little beyond Shen Jiuli's expectation. His move just now seemed ordinary, but in fact it was his ultimate move. In this world, there were not many people who could withstand his move. Even if Xue Ilan was here, if he used this move, he would probably suffer a great loss. But he did not expect Yi Tianli to be able to dodge in time and only lose a hairpin. This person was indeed very capable. If he trained well, he would be a real opponent. Shen Jiuli was sincerely praising him. Yi Tianli felt that he was greatly insulted. His handsome face turned green and white. His opponent's swordsmanship was far beyond his imagination. I did not expect you to be a swordsman. Yi Tianli took a light breath and did not dare to underestimate his opponent. Shen Jiuli nodded and took his words as a compliment. He asked honestly, "Are you still going to let me use the next 2 moves? I can give you a chance to change your mind." Yi Tianli. He knew in his heart that he could not let Yi Tianli go, but if he changed his mind now, the Sky Sovereign below said loudly, "Lord Yi, this is a competition between the strongest. Since the other party has come to challenge you, you should treat him as an equal. This is respect for the other party. You don't have to give in anymore. Just fight seriously." His words naturally gave Yi Tianli a good excuse to step down. Yi Tianli finally heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He cupped his hands towards Shen Jiuli and said, "If that's the case, I won't hold back anymore. Let's have a fair fight." Smart. Shen Jiuli praised him. "You can make the first move this time." Yi Tianli made up his mind and attacked immediately. He was anxious to regain the face he had just lost, so he used his killer move right from the start. The green-glazed sword transformed into countless swords in the air, chasing after Shinjuli like a whirlwind. The rain of swords that filled the sky was extremely beautiful. However, as long as one was stabbed by one of the swords, it would be a calamity of being pierced through the intestines. Back then, countless famous sword immortals and sword devils had fallen under this move of his. It was extremely powerful. When he was dealing with other people, the maximum number of swords he could transform was 8. Now that he was dealing with Shinjuli, he knew that he was a strong opponent. Naturally, he could not hold back anymore. The moment he attacked, he used the highest number of transformations. One sword transformed into 36 swords. It coincided with the number of 36 celestial stars. There were no blind spots and no gaps, completely surrounding Shinjuli. There were only 2 ways to deal with this move. The first was to set up a barrier to block it. The second was to find the main sword and knock it away. The rest of the illusory swords would be destroyed. However, at such a close distance, could Shinjuli really do it? Chapter 16:16. But at such a close distance, these 36 swords looked exactly the same. How could it be easy to find the main sword? It could be said that it was a fool's dream. So after Yi Tianli made this move, he waited for a situation where there was a barrier to block it. His move also had a hidden function. Once it met a defensive barrier, it would automatically explode. The power of one sword's explosion was enough to directly blow a solid building into the sky. If all 35 swords exploded together, that would definitely be enough to make the person in front of him suffer. Even if the explosion did not kill him, it would at least break his barrier, tear his clothes, and embarrass him, taking revenge for the broken hairpin. His plan was very precise, but the person he met was Shinjuli, who did not play by the rules. Shinjuli did not set up any barrier at all. The moment the 36 swords attacked him, he raised the sword in his hand and directly slashed at one of the swords. Chi! With a sound, the long sword in Shinjuli's hand cut through the sword's tip, like cutting through tofu, directly to the sword's hilt. That sword had already cultivated into an immortal spirit. The moment it was struck, it let out an ear-piercing shriek, as if it was a scream before death. Before the shriek stopped, the immortal sword that had once swept through the 8 desolations was neatly split into 2 halves and fell to the ground. The main sword was cut. The other illusory swords naturally could not withstand it. Before they reached Shinjuli, they dissipated. Yi Tianli was stunned. His face turned pale. He did not expect that the opponent could see the difference between an illusory sword and a main sword in such a short time. He also did not expect that the opponent could destroy his immortal sword with a normal sword. Since it was an immortal sword, its spiritual root and its master had something in common. When the immortal sword was destroyed, Yi Tianli was also injured. The blood in his chest surged. Fortunately, he did not put much immortal core power into the sword, or else the injury would be more serious. Like a whirlwind, he retreated a few steps and looked at Shinjuli in bewilderment. You? He had already seen that Shinjuli's sword just now was still an ordinary sword, and it was a sword that everyone could use. It obviously didn't have many tricks, but he couldn't dodge it. Shinjuli did not follow up with another attack. He calmly flicked his sword and looked at Yi Tianli. You can change to another sword. Yi Tianli clenched his teeth and did not waste any more time. Instead, he took out the legendary sword that made him famous, the Heavenly Sword. It was an ink-black treasured sword. It was so black that no light could be reflected. Once the light hit its body, it seemed to be devoured. It looked strange and mysterious. The people below held their breaths when they saw him take out the sword. The Heavenly Sword, the most famous and ruthless immortal sword in the divine demon continent. Once the Heavenly Sword was taken out, it must see blood, eat souls, and never return to the scabbard. The sword spirit of this sword was very powerful. It could automatically attack without a master. The sword spirit of this sword was also very evil. Once it was taken out of the scabbard, it must see blood. No matter if it was an immortal or a demon, once it was defeated, it would eat the soul together with it. It could not even be reincarnated. This sword was originally used to deal with evil people. Yi Tianli had carried it with him for so many years, but the chances of him using it were few and far between. Who would have thought that he would take out this sword at this moment? This showed that Yi Tianli was really going all out. When the heavenly sword was taken out, the originally clear skies suddenly turned dark. Chapter 16-17. As soon as the heavenly sword appeared, the originally clear skies suddenly darkened. The white clouds turned into dark clouds, and there was a faint whistling sound in the air. Lightning flashed in the clouds and circled around the heavenly sword. Yi Tianli was shrouded in the light of the heavenly sword. His clothes were fluttering, and he looked like the god of war. Shun Juli squinted his eyes and looked at the heavenly sword. He vaguely felt that the sword seemed to be a little familiar. He was a knowledgeable person. Although he did not have any memory of living in this continent, he still had an instinctive understanding of some things. This sword seemed to be the ancestor of all swords. The sword spirit in it was a bloodthirsty master who would not be happy without blood. Yi Tianli looked at him coldly. Your origin is unknown. Let the heavenly sword test your strength. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with Shun Juli. He flicked his finger, and the heavenly sword buzzed. A hurricane came out from the sword and directly turned into countless black sword needles in the air. The sword needles combined again and transformed into a black dragon. As soon as the dragon was formed, a huge whirlpool formed in the sky. The roar of the dragon was earth-shattering as it pounced on Shun Juli. The dark clouds in the sky gathered and trapped Shun Juli in the middle in the blink of an eye. Father, be careful. Shen Yanma was frightened and shouted. He suddenly stood up in the wizardry barrier and directly rushed to the wall, wanting to break the barrier and jump out. However, he forgot that this wizardry barrier was set up by his mother. His mother's current kung fu was not comparable to a little boy like him. He did not break the wizardry barrier. Instead, he bounced himself out and sat there with a thud. Fortunately, the wizardry barrier was soft, so his forehead did not have a bruise. He did not care about the flying birds in front of him. He opened his eyes and looked up. He did not want anything to happen to his father. He wanted him to be well. Whether it was his father or his mother, he wanted them all. Not one of them could be missing. He was frightened and worried that he would see his father fall from the sky with blood all over his body. Even his eyelashes were trembling. However, when he saw what was happening in the sky, his eyes opened wider, rounder. At first, the audience thought that they would see flesh and blood flying everywhere. Some of the more timid ones even closed their eyes. However, when they heard the sound of people gasping, they were obviously shocked to the extreme. Therefore, the timid ones opened their eyes and looked at the sky. They immediately opened their mouths and were speechless for a moment. In the sky, that ink-black dragon formed by sword needles flew in front of Shun Juli. However, Shun Juli did not draw his sword. He merely extended his middle finger and pointed it between the dragon's eyebrows. Such a ferocious, intrepid, and invincible black dragon could only shake its head and wag its tail. Like a puppy that had seen its master, it wagged its tail with all its might. Where was the slightest bit of might left? The original body of the heavenly sword was still in Yi Tianli's hand, but at this moment, it was shaking violently, as if it wanted to escape from its master's grasp. Yi Tianli's face was pale. He grabbed the sword hilt with all his might. The web between his thumb and forefinger was bleeding from the shaking. He desperately chanted a spell, trying to regain control of the sword. However, the sword seemed to have gone crazy. The ink-black sword suddenly lit up and a golden light burst out. Not good. This sword actually wanted to kill its master. The original sword hilt actually turned into a sharp blade that could cut through everything in an instant. If Yi Tianli did not let go, all 5 of his fingers would be cut off. Helplessly, he could only let go. The heavenly sword instantly flew out. Chapter 16-18. Helpless, he could only let go. The Heaven's Path sword instantly flew out and flew in front of Shun Juli like a whirlwind. Once the main sword arrived, the black dragon of sword needles instantly disappeared. Shunjuli's finger was on the main sword's tip. The Heaven's Path sword's tip actually transformed into a round head and trembled under Shunjuli's finger. Then, the sword automatically bent and coiled around Shunjuli's arm, rubbing against his arm like a snake. It was as if it had reunited with its owner after a long time. Where was the awe-inspiring aura from before? Shunjuli slowly retracted his hand. The sword immediately stuck close to him again. The sword hilt desperately squeezed into his palm, as if it was begging for him to caress and hold it. Shunjuli's left hand had just touched the head of the black dragon, while his right hand was still holding onto the moonlight sword. When the Heaven's Path sword came over, it desperately squeezed into his right hand, as if it couldn't wait to squeeze the moonlight sword out. It even let out a threatening dragon roar. It was the ancestor of swords. Any immortal or demon swords that had spirituality would be afraid of it and would automatically make way for it. It thought that the moonlight sword wouldn't fight with it and would obediently leave. However, it didn't expect that the moonlight sword was just an ordinary sword. It didn't have any spirituality, so even if the Heaven's Path sword came over, it still remained in its owner's hand. The Heaven's Path sword was furious. Its body suddenly lit up, like a leopard showing its fangs, and directly bit towards the moonlight sword. Very obviously, the Heaven's Path sword was an extremely jealous, immortal sword. It wanted to take the lead before it could bite the moonlight sword. Two snow-white fingers stretched out and clamped onto the Heaven's Path sword's body. The Heaven's Path sword trembled slightly and became obedient. It unwillingly retreated and circled around Shunjuli. Finally, it wormed its way into his left palm. Fearing that Shunjuli wouldn't hold on to it, it automatically turned into a circle and wrapped itself around Shunjuli's wrist. Yi Tianli's pale face was his current expression. Shock was the expression of the spectators below the stage. Everyone's mouth was slightly agape. Their expressions were like people in a peaceful world who saw a dinosaur flying in the sky.
Good.
Father, you are awesome. Shun Nianma jumped up again. He laughed and jumped in the wizardry barrier, causing it to tremble. Mother, isn't Father great? Mother, Lord Father is the strongest in this world. Everyone else, stand aside. Shun Nianma's little face was full of pride. His pair of big eyes sparkled, as if they were about to shine. Mo pursed her lips and looked up at the sky. Her pretty face was expressionless, neither happy nor sad. Shunjuli casually grasped the heavenly Dao sword, and a familiar feeling spread through his heart. Countless images seemed to fly through his mind. Although he could not connect them together, there were a few images of the heavenly Dao sword. He couldn't remember anything else, and he didn't want to remember. However, he understood that the Heavenly Path sword had once belonged to him. He was its true master. The spirit of the sword had recognized its master, so the moment it recognized him, it immediately betrayed its new master and desperately wanted to return to him. At this moment, the Heavenly Path sword was tightly attached to his arm, making a buzzing sound similar to that of a small dragon. It seemed to be acting coquettishly and as if it was complaining. At this time, everyone also understood that Shunjuli was the original master of the Heavenly Path sword. Now it had recognized its ancestors and returned to its master. Yi Tianli's hand was empty, and his face was pale. Looking at the Heavenly Path sword that had betrayed him, he was so shocked that he could not even say a word. Chapter 16:19. The Heavenly Path sword was found by Yi Tianli in a deep valley a few thousand years ago. At that time, the Heavenly Path sword did not recognize him as its master. Because it was stuck in a crack, the sword was slightly rusty. Yi Tianli washed it with rootless water every day. The Heavenly Path sword was bloodthirsty, so Yi Tianli fed it a drop of blood every day. After a few times, the Heavenly Path sword was finally moved by him and reluctantly recognized him as its master. However, the Heavenly Path sword had its own personality and would not easily fight for Yi Tianli. It would only appear proudly when it met a truly powerful opponent. Moreover, it would throw a tantrum whenever it wanted to. Once it fought, it would be completely free. If it wanted to kill the opponent, it would kill the opponent. Even if Yi Tianli wanted to go easy on it, it would not be able to take it back in advance. This time, if he was not forced into a corner, he would not have taken out the Sword Ancestor. He did not expect the Sword Ancestor to leave him at this moment. What was even more unexpected was that the Sword Ancestor actually had such a servile side. After all, he had carried this sword with him for so many years and knew the power of this sword. Even if Shen Jili did nothing and only took out this sword to fight with him, he might not be able to win. Moreover, this opponent was unfathomable. At this time, no matter how unwilling he was, he could only choose to admit defeat. Fortunately, admitting defeat at this time was not considered a loss. Yi Tianli's lips curled up, and he cupped his hands towards Shen Jili. My sword changed sides at the last moment. After all, it has followed me for so many years. How can I bear to attack it? Now, I can only. Before he could say the words admit defeat, Shen Jili interrupted him. You don't have to admit defeat unwillingly. Although this sword is my old sword, I will not use it in this array. He shook his hand, and the Heavenly Path sword that was desperately entangling his wrist disappeared. It was obvious that he kept it in the storage space. Shen Jili still held the ordinary moonlight sword in his hand. His face was indifferent. Just now does not count. You can change to another sword. Yi Tianli. He sighed softly. I only brought these 2 swords. In other words, he did not have a third sword to use. I'll send you off. Suddenly, a soft shout came from below. A crimson long sword flew up and fell directly into Yi Tianli's hand. The crimson sword was as red as the setting sun. Its name was Sky Splitter, and it was the holy artifact of the Demon Lord. There was no weapon that it couldn't destroy, and no protective barrier that it couldn't destroy. When struck by this sword, even if one's vitals weren't injured, it would still corrode and devour one's soul, causing the soul to wail within the sword spirit. Unless the sword master was merciful and released the souls he had collected, he would suffer the pain of being devoured forever, unable to reincarnate. 3 years ago, on the day of the Devil Lord's rebirth, this sword had automatically sought its master. Mo had used it to traverse the 6 realms, defeating all opponents under the heavens and establishing her supreme status. Everyone in the immortal world knew about this sword. Naturally, Yi Tianli had heard of it as well. He had even suffered a loss under this sword. He never thought that Mo would lend him this sword today. The power of this sword was not inferior to the Heavenly Path sword. Because Mo had personally given this sword to him, this sword was very obedient in Yi Tianli's hands. The crimson light flowed around the sword. It was like the eyes of a young girl, able to steal away a person's soul with just one glance. With this sword in hand, Yi Tianli's courage was boosted. Chapter 16:20. He looked at Shen Jili, but Shen Jili did not look at him. Shen Jili's eyes fell on Mo, who was standing there looking up at him. Both of their eyes met in the air. Shen Jili's face was slightly pale, but Mo smiled. Her eyes even had a hint of interest and malice, with a hint of challenge. Shen Jili looked at her for a moment and finally looked away. He slowly raised his head and looked at Yi Tianli. His eyes, which had some fluctuations just now, had returned to normal. He said faintly, I want to change my sword too. Yi Tianli's heart sank. Originally, he wanted to use the advantage of the Sky Splitter sword to kill Shen Jili. However, if he wanted to change his sword, he would definitely change to the Heavenly Dao sword. The power of the 2 swords was almost the same, so he would not be able to gain any advantage in terms of weapons. However, at this time, he had to let him change his sword. Therefore, he paused for a moment and could only pretend to be generous. He smiled and said, Of course, you can use the Heavenly Dao sword. Everyone below also opened their eyes wide and waited for Shen Jili to take out the Heavenly Dao sword again. Unexpectedly, after Shen Jili kept the Moonlight sword, he stretched out his palm and directly condensed an ordinary black iron sword in his palm. He faintly added, I will use this. Yi Tianli was speechless. Everyone was shocked. The black iron sword looked ordinary at first glance. It was not even as good as the moonlight sword. Mo's long eyelashes drooped down, hiding the color in her eyes. She waved her sleeves behind her, and a quaint chair automatically appeared behind her. She sat on it, propping up her chin with her palm as she lazily looked at everything above her. After a moment, she suddenly seemed to realize something. She turned her head and looked at the spherical wizardry barrier that had been hanging beside her. Inside the wizardry barrier, Shin Nianma's eyes were wide open. He looked at her in disbelief, as if he could not believe that his mother would side with an outsider to go against his father. He pursed his lips, and tears rolled in his eyes. Mo's eyes met his, and his heart trembled slightly. It was as if a sharp needle had pierced into the depths of his heart. She paused for a moment, unwilling to meet his gaze again. With a gentle wave of her sleeve, the originally transparent barrier turned pink and non-transparent. Shin Nianma's tiny figure was finally hidden in the wizardry barrier. She let out a light sigh. It was better not to let such a young child see such a gory scene, in case it stimulated his little heart. She then raised a hand and gently pressed it on the pink enchantment. The pink enchantment shook like a cradle, and her voice was transmitted into the enchantment. "Be good, have a good sleep." The little one was very obedient inside the enchantment. He definitely could not see the outside now, but he did not rush around anxiously. Instead, he sat there motionlessly. Mo could sense his movements at this moment. Seeing that he was indeed obedient, he let out a sigh of relief. The two people above had already started fighting, and the clouds were surging in the sky. The sky splitter was indeed extraordinary. Even if it was not controlled by a person, it could still move freely in the air. Every move it made was earth-shattering. The sky splitter was also a very murderous evil sword. Once it was out of the sheath, no matter who the opponent was, it would exert a great power. Every move was bloodthirsty and deadly. It circled around Shinjuli in a hurry and attacked him as if he was its nemesis. It would only be satisfied after he was killed by the sword. Chapter 16:21. Shinjuli pursed his lips and poured his divine power into the black iron sword in his hand. It emitted a dim light and formed a black iron shield around Shinjuli's body. The Sky Splitter sword struck a few times but was rebounded by the shield. If the Sky Splitter sword was in the hands of the Demon Lord, then there was no barrier that could not be broken. But the person using it now was Yi Tianli. Yi Tianli's divine power and the Sky Splitter sword's divine power were somewhat incompatible, so the Sky Splitter sword could not unleash its full power in his hands. Even so, when the Sky Splitter sword struck the black iron sword, there were dents on the black iron sword, and some parts even cracked. In less than a cup of tea's time, the black iron sword was already badly damaged. Fortunately, Shinjuli's divine power was amazing. During the fight, he would repair the cracks on the black iron sword, so the sword would not be destroyed in an instant. Yi Tianli secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he mainly relied on the power of the treasured sword and had an unfair advantage, he still had the upper hand. As long as he had the upper hand, he would have the hope of marrying Mo. He actually felt that it was a little strange. Since the start of the fight, Shinjuli had been defending and did not attack at all. He did not even counterattack the Sky Splitter sword. The people below the stage also noticed this, and could not help but look at each other. They did not understand why Shinjuli would do this. There was no lack of top experts in the audience, but after watching for a while, these experts understood that if they were to go against the Sky Splitter sword, even if they had a divine weapon in hand, they would not have any hope of winning. The most taboo in a fight between experts was to be restrained and not given at all. Now Shinjuli obviously had a lot of scruples. The broken sword in his hand was actually afraid of hurting the Sky Splitter sword and did not stab at it. Occasionally, when the two swords clashed, he would deliberately slanted his sword to prevent the sword from colliding with the Sky Splitter sword. Shinjuli obviously had some scruples about the Sky Splitter sword. He was at a disadvantage, but he could not bear to hurt the sword. Then to this Demon Lord. Everyone couldn't help but turn to look at Amo. Amo sat there expressionlessly, holding her chin as she watched the fight in the sky. Her expression was very calm, so calm that no one could see any fluctuations in her heart. She was just a spectator. The two people who were fighting had nothing to do with her. At first, everyone thought that she would not help anyone. But now, it seemed that she still had some feelings for Yi Tianli and was still willing to marry him. As for Xinjuli, she should be repulsed, right? She didn't want him to win. Everyone faintly felt that there was something wrong between the Devil Lord and Xinjuli. There seemed to be a lot of secrets to be uncovered, but no one could dig them out at the moment. They could only wait and see. As for the Celestial Arch, his expression changed the moment the Heavenly Tao's sword automatically returned to Xinjuli. However, he was a profound figure who didn't express his emotions with words. Even the subjects of the immortal dimension around him couldn't figure out exactly what he was thinking at this moment. He was also watching the battle in the sky. He watched as Xinjuli was forced to retreat by the Sky Splitter sword. He watched as he gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Yi Tianli's eyes showed excitement. It was finally time for him to vent his anger.
This person made a fool of him just now.
He definitely couldn't let him off. At this time, taking the opportunity to kill him with his sword was also a good idea. That way, he could eliminate all future troubles. Chapter 16:22. Moreover, if he used this sword to kill his opponent, the people below could not say anything. After all, this sword had its own will. He could just say that he could not control it. Seeing that the Sky Splitter sword was attacking Xinjuli to the point that he could not fight back, Yi Tianli leaped up and floated 30 feet forward. He wanted to add more strength to the Sky Splitter sword to kill Xinjuli. And a sudden change happened at this moment. Xinjuli, who was originally suppressed by the Sky Splitter sword and had no power to fight back, flashed like lightning. He directly bypassed the attack of the Sky Splitter sword and slashed at Yi Tianli's wrist with his black iron sword. No one could describe how fast Xinjuli's movements were at this moment, and no one could describe how amazing his sword was. By the time Yi Tianli reacted, his opponent's sword had already pierced his wrist meridian. Yi Tianli's wrist shook violently, and his telekinesis was instantly sealed. He could not move as if his acupoints were sealed. At the same time, the Sky Splitter sword turned around and attacked Xinjuli from behind. With a soft sound, the Sky Splitter sword pierced through Xinjuli's protective wizardry barrier. The sharp edge of the sword pierced through his clothes and blood oozed out from the wound. It was bright red like pearls. The sword trembled slightly, as if it wanted to stab in, but it did not have the strength to continue. Suddenly, with a buzzing sound, it flew down and disappeared into Amo's sleeve. Xinjuli did not care about the Sky Splitter sword behind him. He pointed the tip of the sword at Yi Tianli's forehead. "You lost." With just 3 words, he announced the result. No one had any objections to this result. Naturally, the higher-ups of the 6 realms who were watching the battle below did not have any objections. This round ended with Xinjuli's victory. Xinjuli stepped on the high platform again. His eyes fell on Amo, and there was a complicated look in his eyes. Amo looked at him with a smile. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were cold. She said 2 words, "Congratulations."
"Thank you."
Xinjuli also replied to her with 2 words. His eyes fell on the enchantment behind her, and his voice was as calm as water.
"Can you let him out now?"
Amo tilted his head and looked at him. "Is he really your son?" Xinjuli looked at her and said, "He's also your son." "Yes, that's right.
He's also my son."
Amo smiled. "I personally delivered him." She waved her hand, and the layer of pink wizardry barrier disappeared, revealing Xin Nianma inside. "Little brat, since you are quite obedient, I will let you go." She suddenly paused. Xin Nianma sat there. His big eyes were already red and swollen. He looked at her with a strange and distant gaze. It was as if he was no longer the child who had reached out his hands and desperately wanted to be held by her, desperately burrowing into her arms. After he appeared, He slowly stood up in the enchantment. His two small hands supported the edge of the enchantment as he looked at Shinjuli, who was standing not far away. "Father!" he called out, and then reached out his small hands. "Father, hugs." Mo pursed her lips and glanced at the little one. "Little brat, do you want your father or your mother?" The little one looked at her, then looked at Shinjuli, and then looked at her again. His little face seemed to be in a dilemma. He murmured, "Myanmar wants both," then he pursed his lips. "But mother doesn't want my father, and she still favors the outsider. Myanmar wants my father." Mo did not speak. She just waved her hand again, and the enchantment that surrounded Shin Myanmar finally shattered. Chapter 16:23. Shin Myanmar immediately rushed out and rushed directly to Shinjuli. "Father!" The little one still had tears in his eyes, but he stubbornly stopped crying. Like a small cannonball, he rushed directly into Shinjuli's arms. Shinjuli carried him and looked at the child's red and swollen eyes. His fingers clenched in his sleeves, and finally, he looked at Mo. Mo looked at him with a smile. "Shinjuli, do you still want to be engaged with me?" Shinjuli finally looked at her face again. They looked at each other for a moment and smiled. "Why not?" Mo was speechless. She smiled leisurely. "You should know that I don't have a good impression of you. Even if you win and I agree to this marriage according to the oath, I may not marry you." Shinjuli gently pressed his palm on his son's eyelids and said faintly, "One step at a time." A faint white light appeared from his palm and hovered in front of his son's eyes. After a moment, he moved his hand away. Shin Myanmar's red and swollen eyes finally disappeared, and his big eyes returned to normal. "Myanmar, I remember you once said that when you were still in your mother's stomach, your mother taught you that a man should bleed and not cry. Have you forgotten it so quickly?" Shin Myanmar pursed his lips, and his face was a little red. He also felt that it was embarrassing to cry so miserably. "Father, I am wrong." He snuggled his big head on Shinjuli's chest and rubbed it. "Father, I miss you." Shinjuli raised his hand and rubbed his head. He nodded and did not say anything else. Since the little guy was born, it was the first time Shinjuli carried him. Although he was only a few days old, his size was like a 1-year-old child. He was pink and soft like a little glutinous rice bun. When he was carried in his arms, he was heavy and chubby. A child's expression was very obvious, and Shin Myanmar was no exception. When he was in the stone, he was very curious about how it felt to lie in his father's arms. Now he finally had a taste of it. His father's embrace was like a mountain, giving him an extremely safe feeling. Just now, he was worried sick in the enchantment. Now that he was in his father's arms, he was finally relieved. He didn't hold back and kissed his father's face. Shinjuli. His son was too enthusiastic. Mo watched the interaction between the father and son coldly from the side. It was a natural display of affection between father and son that could not be faked. Her eyes deepened slightly, and she was in a trance for a moment, but then her eyes became clear again, and she returned to her indifferent appearance. She smiled gently and said, "Since you don't want to back down, then let's have another 2 rounds." At this moment, Yi Tianli also landed on the ground. He looked a little down, but he was still an elegant gentleman. He cupped his hands towards Mo. "Mo, thank you for the sword." Mo smiled lazily. "You're welcome. Let's prepare for the second round." Yi Tianli had already thought it through. Through the previous round of battle, Shinjuli's psyche power was obviously unfathomable. His spells must be very powerful as well. If they were to compete in spells in the second round, he was afraid that he would still lose miserably. Therefore, in the second round, he proposed to compete in Guqin skills. His Guqin skills were famous in the 6 realms. He once attracted countless birds to dance. He was the famous Guqin master in the 6 realms. When he proposed this, Shinjuli looked at him strangely. "Are you sure you want to compete in Guqin skills? This is just a casual skill. No matter how strong it is, it can't be considered as a strong skill." Chapter 16:24. He felt that if they were to compete in zither skills, he would definitely win. When he proposed this, Shun-Juli looked at him strangely. Are you sure you want to compete in zither skills? This skill is just a leisure skill. No matter how strong it is, it can't be considered a strong skill. Yi Tianli heard that he seemed to be rejecting the idea and thought that he was not good at it. He immediately said, "How can you be the husband of the Devil Lord by just fighting and killing? You also need to be good at both the pen and the sword." The Devil Lord also likes to listen to the zither. Only after marriage can the zither and zither be in harmony. According to what you said, the second round of the zither competition? Yes, zither skills. After this round, you can choose the content of the third round. Yi Tianli expressed his generosity. Shun-Juli said faintly, "I don't need to choose anymore. 2 out of 3 rounds." After this round, Yi Tianli could only be eliminated. There was no need for a third round. Thus, the second round of the competition began. The audience was cheering. Venerable Ye's music was not always heard. Listening to his music was a pleasure. He was definitely at the level of a master. If this was in modern times, he would be the Prince of Piano, Richard Clayderman. There were also people who were secretly worried for Shun-Juli and looked at him with pity. They only hoped that he would choose what he was best at in the third round and turn the tables: a zither table, a zither stool, and a man in a purple robe playing the zither. When the sound of the zither rang, the whole square quieted down. People closed their eyes and listened to the sound of nature. Their mood rose and fell with the sound of the zither. The sound of the zither reverberated through the heavens and the earth. Birds flew over one after another from afar. There were red, white, flowery, gray, blue, and a myriad of colors, circling around the square. When the zither was played halfway, there were already hundreds of birds in the sky. They danced in the air with the music. It was very beautiful. When the song ended, the birds were still circling in the sky. They could not bear to leave. Yi Tianli plucked the last note and floated up. He glanced at Shun-Juli. Shun-Juli was sitting on the side with Shun-Nianma on his lap. One of his palms was pressed on Shun-Nianma's back as if he was giving him a massage. His fingertips were glowing with a faint white light from time to time. Apparently, he was taking the opportunity to treat Shun-Nianma's illness. After all, Shun-Nianma had just had a high fever, so his body was still weak. Shun-Juli noticed it when he carried him in his arms. This son of his was brought up by him, so naturally. He doted on him very much. He couldn't bear for him to suffer even a little bit, let alone allow him to be unhealthy. Therefore, he immediately treated him. His medical skills were undoubtedly the best. While Yi Tianli was playing the guqin, he had already made Shun-Nianma sweat profusely. This process was obviously not very comfortable. The little guy frowned slightly, but he could still endure it by pursing his lips. After Yi Tianli finished playing, Shun-Juli also finished massaging the child. After Shun-Nianma was sweating, Shun-Juli cast a cleaning spell on him to make him feel refreshed. After cleaning up, the little guy felt much more refreshed. All the illness had disappeared without a trace. "Father, it was so painful just now, but I didn't cry." Shun-Nianma opened his big eyes to ask for credit. Shun-Juli patted his head. "You are like a little man now." Shun-Nianma was praised, so he was immediately in high spirits. His little chest also puffed out. He could not help but look at his mother again. His mother was sitting there with one hand on her cheek. She was looking at him thoughtfully. Chapter 16:25. Shun-Nianma chose his father out of anger. Now that he saw his mother again, he was still very fond of her. When the mother and daughter looked at each other, he quickly showed his mother a big smile. However, Aimo was immune to his angelic smile. She casually looked away and did not look at the father and son anymore. Oh no! Was his mother angry with him? Shun-Nianma was anxious and wronged. He pursed his lips and tried to reach out his little hand in the direction of his mother. He looked at her eagerly. He hoped that she would look at him again. As long as she showed any signs of wanting to hug him, he would immediately rush over. However, his mother did not look at him. She did not look at him again. She ignored his little hand. Shin Myanmar slowly withdrew his little hand. What should he do? He wanted both his father and mother. He wanted them to be together. Shin Juli looked down slightly. How could he not see his son's disappointment? However, his gaze landed on Almo's face again. The moment he saw her, he had the urge to carry her away without a care for anything else. However, he could not. She had obviously forgotten about him, and he was the high and mighty Devil Master. If he forced her to be with him, it would only make her more disgusted. Perhaps they would never be able to go back. Therefore, he had to take it step by step. In the past, he always forced her to follow his footsteps and always let her stumble behind him. Now, he would follow her footsteps. She would be his. This would never change. After Yi Tianli finished his song, the audience applauded as usual. Yi Tianli smiled at Shinjuli, who had just stood up. He could not hide his pride in his smile. You can start now. When I played, I attracted a total of 128 auspicious birds. As long as you can surpass this number, you will win. Shin Myanmar pouted. Not all of them are auspicious birds. I saw 5 crows just now. Yi Tianli was speechless. He wanted to kick this little bastard out. Shin Juli was too lazy to speak. When he could crush his opponent with his strength, anything he said would be superfluous. He raised his hand, and a guqin appeared on his lap. Shin Myanmar stared at his father's guqin and then looked at Yi Tianli's guqin. He said loudly, Father, is this an ordinary guqin? That's an immortal zither. His small eyes were very sharp. He could see that Yi Tianli's guqin was surrounded by immortal energy, while his father's guqin was an authentic one without any immortal energy. Shin Juli hugged him with one arm and played the zither with the other. It's okay. Father, put me down so that you can play the zither. I promise I won't run around. Shin Myanmar wanted his father to win, so he did not want to burden him. He could already run on his own. No need, just be obedient. Shin Juli didn't even raise his head. He stroked the strings of the zither with one hand, and a string of notes flowed out. Finally, he finished tuning. Yi Tianli was speechless. His face did not look good. He actually wanted to hold the child and play the zither. This was blatant contempt. The people below looked at each other and felt that Shin Juli was too conceited. Playing the zither with one hand and competing with the guqin saint? Did he know that he could not win, so he found a good excuse when he lost? The Emperor Immortal stood up. If you feel that no one is taking care of your son, I can send the second concubine to take care of him. No need. Shin Juli still said the same 2 words. He raised his fingers, and the notes flowed under his fingers. Chapter 16:26. Yi Tianli sat on the side in a daze. He stared blankly at the sky where a phoenix was leading a flock of birds to dance to the music. Regardless of the number or species of birds, there were too many to count. Not counting the dancing birds, there were at least a few thousand birds perched on top of the surrounding buildings. Everyone was so fascinated by the music that they had forgotten what day it was. When the music ended, the entire square fell into an unprecedented silence. Everyone was still in shock. The birds were obviously not satisfied. They quietly stopped at the corners of the pavilions and eaves. Pairs of small eyes were wide open as they looked at Shin Juli with anticipation. A moment later, there was a burst of thunderous applause. Countless pairs of eyes looked at Shin Juli with admiration. Their eyes were like fans who saw their idol. In this round, Shin Juli won by a landslide. There was no suspense at all. After all, Yi Tianli was a reverend in the celestial world. Since he agreed to the bet, he had to admit defeat. His face was pale as he saluted Shin Juli. You have won. Xiao Xian accepts defeat wholeheartedly. Then, he bowed deeply to Imo. Imo, I am sorry. He had failed to live up to her expectations. After he finished his sentence, he turned and disappeared. Shin Juli looked at Imo and smiled. Devil Master, can I be your betrothed now? Imo rested her chin on her hand and looked at him. She smiled lazily. I do want to find the strongest person to get engaged with. However, there is a prerequisite. The person must be unmarried. And you? Her eyes fell on Shin Nianma. You even have a child. Obviously, you do not meet my requirements. Before Shin Julie could speak, Shin Nianma quickly interrupted. Nianma was born from a stone. Mother, you personally delivered my birth, so you should still remember. As for father picked me up by accident. I was picked up by him, so father is unmarried. Shin Julie was speechless. Everyone was speechless. Yi Tianli had already proven that Shin Nianma was born from a rock. Therefore, no one could refute his claim. Everyone looked at Shin Julie to see what he would say. Shin Julie hugged his son and only said a few words. I swear in the name of the heavenly Tao that I am unmarried. As for this child, he's mine and also yours.
He's ours.
In this world, no one dared to lie under the name of the heavenly Tao. Once they lied, they would immediately be struck by lightning. The heavenly lightning would expose his lies, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Therefore, after Shin Julie said this, everyone looked at the clear sky and finally believed him. Shin Julie slowly walked over to Mo and extended his hand. Mo, can we get engaged now? Mo smiled and tilted his head to look at him. I still don't seem to have a good impression of you. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you if I'm not happy? I'm not afraid. Even if you kill me, I'm willing to do so. Although you look cold, you're good at saying sweet things. I'm not saying sweet things. I'm just telling the truth. Mo finally stood up and smiled lazily. Well, since you have proven that you are the strongest person in this world, then I'll get engaged with you. She put her hand in his palm. He didn't know if it was because she was a demon, but although her hands were still small and soft, they were cold, as if they didn't have the warmth of a human. Chapter 16:27. Shin Julie's eyes darkened slightly. Looking at her smiling but emotionless eyes, he felt as if his heart had been stabbed again. He tightened his grip on her hand. His hand was hot, but his grip was unable to warm her fingertips. He held Nianma in one hand and held her hand with the other. These two were his most beloved people in his heart. They should be a family. No matter what, he and she were back together again. They were family again. He would thoroughly investigate the main reason why she was so emotionless. He would let her, who used to be lively, cheerful, smart, and lovely, come back. Although the people below had different thoughts, no one could stop the situation from developing to this point. The ceremonial officer walked over hesitantly. Devil Master, should we prepare a new Yanhao cup? Shin Julie shook his head. No need. In fact, he had already prepared everything. Since he planned to snatch the marriage, he naturally prepared everything. Shin Nianma was afraid that he would delay his father's ceremony. He stretched out his little hand to Mo and revealed a big smile. Mother, hug. Mo glanced at him. Didn't your father hug you? I like to be hugged by mother. The smile on Shin Nianma's little face was bigger and sweeter. However, his pair of big eyes were full of fear and uncertainty. He was afraid that his mother would reject him again. Mo did not know why her heart ached. Before she could think of what to do, she had already taken the little guy and held him in her arms. Ever since she came to this world, she had always felt empty. However, since this little guy came to her side, her empty heart seemed to have been filled a little. Especially when she held his chubby little body, she actually felt a little satisfied. When the little guy chose to leave her, she actually felt disappointed and jealous. Of course, she did not show these feelings. She had been very indifferent. As for Shin Julie, she did not have any feelings for him. She even had an instinctive dislike for him. She did not want him to be her fiancé, so she wanted to help Yi Tianli. She did not expect that Yi Tianli and Shin Julie were so different. Even if she helped him, the result could not be changed. Forget it. Anyway, her current life was quite boring. Perhaps this person could bring her some joy. Shin Julie was still holding her hand, as if he was afraid that she would run away. Out of nowhere, he pulled out a white jade cup. The cup was extremely exquisite, engraved with a pattern of mandarin ducks playing in water. The carving was extremely lifelike, and every feather of the mandarin ducks was lifelike. Some of the people below were also knowledgeable. The moment they saw the cup, they all secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. That white jade was no ordinary white jade. It was the bone of a vicious beast from the netherworld Dead Sea. This kind of evil beast's spine was born with a piece of jade. Legend has it that if this kind of jade was used to carve a good cup, it would allow the male and female lead, who used this cup to worship the heavens and earth, to be together forever. However, this beast was an extremely ferocious beast. It could almost be called an ancient magical beast. It had boundless strength and boundless magical power. No one dared to provoke it. A single beast could destroy an entire army of the celestial realm. Moreover, these beasts liked to move around in groups, which made them even harder to capture. Even if it was Yi Tianli, he did not dare to provoke them. He did not expect this unknown Xinjiuli to have obtained this kind of jade in advance. He even carved such an exquisite cup. Mo's gaze also fell on the cup. You came prepared. Chapter 16:28. Xinjiuli looked at her and said, "For you, I have always come prepared." This person was much more thick-skinned than Yi Tianli and seemed to be stronger than Yi Tianli. Mo tried to withdraw her hand. Take the rootless water. Usually the ritual was performed with both hands. He could not do it with only one hand. The earlier the ritual was completed, the earlier she could rest. She was sleepy again. Xinjiuli did not have the intention to let go of her hand. It will only be meaningful if we do it together. Mo was speechless. You can't do it, right? Then let the officiant do it. I won't help you with this. This is our own ritual. It will only be meaningful if we complete it ourselves. Come, hold the cup. I don't need your help. Just hold it. Xinjiuli put the thin handle in her hand and let her hold it. Then he held her hand from the outside. His big hand wrapped around her small hand. Both of their hands were held together. It looked very harmonious. Shen Nianmo reached out his little hand. Father, Mother, can I hold your hand as well? Mother, hold my hand. Father, hold my mother's hand. Xinjiuli did not care about the boy's request. This was their engagement ceremony, not a family ceremony. Why would this boy want to join in the fun? He was also afraid that a long delay might lead to trouble. Ning Xuema had turned into Mo, and her temperament had become unpredictable, making it hard for people to grasp. If by any chance she became impatient, then the engagement ceremony would definitely be unable to proceed. Therefore, he immediately performed the ritual. He did not do a lot of complicated spells like Yi Tianli. He only pinched a spell with his fingers and pointed to the sky. The rain clouds in the sky instantly condensed and formed a small area above Xinjiuli's head. A moment later, raindrops the size of a copper coin formed a straight line in the sky and directly poured into the white jade cup. With the addition of the rootless water, the mandarin ducks carved on the cup seemed to come alive. Under the sunlight, they seemed to swim in the water. In the blink of an eye, the cup was filled.
It was just the right amount.
Not a drop more, not a drop less. The rain and clouds in the sky had also dispersed, and not a single extra drop of water was left behind. The feelings of the spectators below could only be expressed with one word: holy shit. Indeed, comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Xinjiuli, who had appeared out of nowhere, was a freak of nature. No matter how dignified the female immortals were, they couldn't help but cheer. This included the two arrogant concubines of the Celestial Emperor. Their hands were almost swollen. When the wine in the cup containing Xinjiuli and Mo's blood beads turned into rain and fell from the sky, the entire square resounded with thunderous applause. The engagement ceremony was finally completed. Mo yawned. All right, from now on, you're my fiancé. I'm tired, so please take care of the guests. I'm going to rest. She turned to leave. Xinjiuli pulled her back with a little force. Wait, there's still a ceremony that hasn't been completed. Mo raised her eyebrows. What ceremony? Xinjiuli stared at her. Those deep blue eyes seemed to be rolling with waves. He smiled slightly and said in a low but clear voice, "Where we come from, we still have to kiss each other before we get engaged." He spoke very quickly. Before she could react, he took the opportunity to pull her into his arms and lowered his head to kiss her lips. It was soft and tender, like crystal tofu. There was even a very light milky fragrance. Chapter 16:29. Shin Juli suddenly opened his eyes and saw Shin Nianma's beautiful big eyes right in front of him. It turned out that at the most critical moment, Imo used Shin Nianma in his arms as a shield. Therefore, Shin Juli kissed his son's little mouth. Shin Juli was speechless. Shin Nianma still did not know that his first kiss had been taken away by his father. He only knew that he liked it when his parents kissed him. It made him feel pampered, so he generously kissed Shin Juli on the cheek as a return gift. Shin Juli was speechless. Just like that, the engagement ceremony came to a perfect end. Imo did not like to socialize, so he left early with the child. Shin Juli had just become the fiancé of the Devil Master, so he could be considered as half the owner of the Mo Palace. On such an occasion, he should be smooth and slick in socializing. However, Shin Juli had always been used to doing things his own way. If he did not want to do something, no one could force him to do it. Moreover, no matter where he went, he was used to being the leader. This time, in order to make the engagement ceremony a complete success, he stayed to drink a few glasses of wine with the guests. If it were someone else, they would have to be humble on this day and go to every table to toast. However, Shin Juli did not do that. He just picked up a glass of wine on the high platform and swept his gaze across the crowd. Some of the noisy square quieted down. He had a kind of temperament, the temperament of a person who had been in the top position for a long time. This kind of temperament made the leaders of the 6 realms feel a kind of pressure. Although they were dissatisfied that he did not come down to toast, they could not say it out loud. Shin Juli stood on the stage and toasted a few glasses of wine. He did not say much, but every sentence was on the point. In short, there was only one meaning. He, Shin Juli, was now the Devil Lord's husband, so he would advance and retreat with her. They were husband and wife, and he would protect her at all costs. His words made the people of the immortal realm shed tears in their hearts. Immortals and demons were at odds with each other, and because the immortal realm didn't have enough backbone to oppose the demon realm, they succumbed to the demon master's despotic power. One super demon master was enough of a headache for them, and now she had a super awesome husband. Then how could the immortal world still have a chance to turn things around? Wouldn't that mean he would forever be under the devil's rule? As for the other realms, they were actually anxious in their hearts. The combination of Shin Juli and the Devil Lord was simply invincible. In the future, the people of the Devil Realm would most likely be able to do whatever they wanted. No one would dare to provoke them. They would truly be the dominant force. Of course, the people of the Devil World were still cheering thunderously. Each of them puffed out their chests and folded their bellies as they looked at the people of the other realms. It was still the Celestial Emperor who was unwilling to give up. He asked, "I heard that the Heavenly Dao Sword was once an ancient divine artifact, and it might even be the old artifact of that annihilated god. Now that it belongs to Your Excellency, what is Your Excellency's relationship with that annihilated god?" When this question was asked, the entire crowd fell silent. Although the crowd didn't know the specific story between the ancient gods and demons, they all knew that the gods and demons were at odds with each other at that time. In fact, a battle had almost destroyed the entire gods-demons continent. Now, the demon master had returned, but that ancient god hadn't. And Shin Juli had appeared so suddenly and subdued the Heavenly Dao Sword. Furthermore, there wasn't the slightest bit of demonic chi on his body, and there was even a faint auspicious light surrounding him. This meant that the cultivation technique he cultivated didn't belong to the Devil Realm. Based on all of the above, the crowd couldn't help but suspect his identity. Someone blurted out, "Your Excellency can't be. You can't be that ancient god, right?" Chapter 16:30. Shin Juli's gaze fell upon the celestial arch. His gaze was as calm as still water, but the celestial Darch felt as if he had been doused with cold water from head to toe. I don't know who the god you're talking about is, but please remember that I'm Shinjuli, not anyone else. I won't be anyone else. The celestial Darch. Everyone else. The celestial Darch originally wanted to recruit him to fight against the demonic realm.
But now he had to put that thought aside for the time being.
As for the people from the other realms, they were secretly relieved. If that ancient god really did return, the gods and demons would not coexist. Just like how there were positive and negative poles in the sky, the two sides would fight sooner or later, and the demonic realm would suffer again. Two tigers could not live on one mountain, so it was enough for one world to only have one lord. Furthermore, this lord did not care much, and did not have much ambition. The people of the six realms felt that this was good, and did not want to change the situation. Thus, the engagement banquet came to a successful end. After this engagement banquet, Shunjuli's name instantly spread to every corner of the world. Almost everyone knew that he was the fiancé of the current demon lord. His spells and sword skills were unfathomable, and even his guqin skills were amazing. His playing of the guqin had once attracted a phoenix to dance and thousands of birds to circle around him. Furthermore, he was playing the guqin with one hand while holding a child in the other. No one could imagine what would happen if he focused on playing with both hands. Those who were present at that time were lucky enough to witness this scene. Countless people went back and talked about the battle between the most powerful beings. Those who talked about it were proud, and those who listened were moved. Especially the young girls who were present. They became the envy of all the young girls in the six realms because they witnessed it with their own eyes on this continent. Yi Tianli was originally the dream lover of all the young girls. Ever since the engagement banquet, Shunjuli's popularity had surpassed Yi Tianli's. He had replaced Yi Tianli's position and became the new idol. Many girls wanted to meet him by chance. They were lovesick because of him. Of course, Demon Lord Amo's cold and strange temperament and supreme status also attracted the hearts of countless young men. Some of the people present were good at painting, so they had already drawn her appearance. Somehow, it had spread throughout the continent. Originally, the Demon Lord in people's hearts was a ferocious monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. Unexpectedly, it was such a beautiful little girl. It was hard to imagine that such a delicate little girl had lived for tens of thousands of years. Everyone felt that their worldview had been refreshed. When a person's status is too high, people will only put him or her on the altar and worship him or her as the savior in their hearts, who can only be seen from afar and not played with. There were very few people who wanted to develop an equal relationship with the other party, and that would require universal condemnation. Therefore, when Shinjuli's position in the Tianci continent was too high, the women of that world felt that it was blasphemy to even think about him. The women who fell in love with him were either fairies, foxes, or even Ning Shuama, the transmigrator. Similarly, Amo's position in this world was also very high, so there were not many people who really wanted to be close to her and wanted to marry her. Even when Yi Tianli was with her, he was a little afraid and trembling with fear. Chapter 1631. Even when Yi Tianli was with her, he was a little fearful. He was afraid that he would make her unhappy, so he did not dare to force her to do anything. Of course, the others did not dare to do anything either. He had always been regarded as the tallest person. Although he was cool and handsome because he was held too high, he became lonely. There were only subordinates and passers-by who tried to curry favor with him. He did not even have a true friend. When he was really depressed, he could not even find a good friend to talk to. Therefore, after 3 years, Imo used to think that life was cool and domineering. Gradually, she became bored and found it difficult to pass the time. Therefore, she wanted to get engaged and find a partner. It was not for anything else but to have someone to talk to. Yi Tianli had been by her side for so long. She thought that she could get rid of her loneliness a little. In fact, she did not have much in common with Yi Tianli. She went out with him several times only because she was too bored. Yi Tianli was gentle and considerate to her and acted according to her mood. Therefore, after a long time, she still felt that her life was a little empty. She still could not find anything in this world that really interested her. Her life seemed to be glorious, but in fact, it was somewhat muddle-headed. However, this kind of life ended at the moment when she and Julie were engaged. She suddenly realized that her life had suddenly become busy. Ever since Julie had gotten engaged to her, he had openly moved into Mo Palace as her fiancé. There was only a wall between his palace and hers. He would report to her place at least once a day, and this time it was especially long. He came in the morning and left at night.
He stayed by her side the whole day.
She was used to being alone in the past 3 years. Subconsciously, she did not trust anyone. Naturally, she did not want to meet with one person so frequently. Therefore, on the 3rd day, she began to negotiate with him seriously. However, he had his reasons. He said that Nianma was with her. The child was so young that he needed his father to take care of him. It sounded like an excuse. Therefore, Mo turned around and threw the little boy who had been pestering her to sleep to him so that he could take care of him all day long. However, the little boy hugged her leg and did not want to let go. He cried loudly and said that his mother could not abandon Nianma. Nianma wanted to be with his mother. Ever since she came to this world, she had maintained the appearance of a 13 or 14-year-old girl. Now that this little fellow was crying and calling her mother, she also felt drunk, but damn it, she didn't feel out of place. She could harden her heart to anyone, but not him. Whenever the little fellow cried or laughed, it would inexplicably tug at her heart. The child seemed to lack motherly love and stayed in her arms every day. Especially when he slept at night, he had to hug her arm to sleep. After he pulled it out, he would close his eyes and search for it in a daze. His 2 little hands would scratch around until he grabbed her arm and hugged it in his arms. She didn't know what a normal child was like, but she felt that this little ancestor was extraordinarily clingy, even more clingy than a dog skin plaster. If the child couldn't be pushed out, the father naturally couldn't be pushed out either. She didn't know who Julie had learned how to pick up girls from. Every day, when he arrived in the morning fog, he would give her a bouquet of flowers. Those flowers were exotic species that she had never seen before. They were quiet and fragrant. Not only were they beautiful, but they also had a refreshing effect. However, Mo did not keep any of those flowers. The moment he sent them to her, she would throw them out or throw them out in front of him. Chapter 1632. After the flowers were thrown out, they would wither at his feet. Although he did not show anything on his face, there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes from time to time. He would clean up the flowers and the scattered petals. Then he would send a different flower the next day. Somehow, Mo felt happy when she saw the disappointment in his eyes. Therefore, she seemed to have finally found a little fun and did not get tired of it. Later, every time he sent flowers, she would not only throw them out but also wipe away the fragrance of the flowers. No matter what kind of flowers it was the same. Even if she liked some of the flowers, she would throw them out without hesitation because they were sent by him. Throwing the flowers had become an instinct and a pleasure. After persisting for a month, he finally stopped sending flowers. Mo subconsciously waited for him for the whole morning, but he did not come. She was a little puzzled, but she did not show it. Recently, little Nianma was very curious and always pestered her to teach him this and that. His little mouth was very sweet, and he could not stop talking about his mother. In the past month, he was much closer to her. He let her hug him, praise him, and play with him. Little Nianma began to find it funny that his mother did not accept the flowers sent by his father. Later, he was a little embarrassed for his father. Later, he even gave his father an idea. He said that his mother probably hated flowers, so he advised him not to send flowers. However, his father was very stubborn in this aspect. He gave and gave and gave. He was undaunted. Every time little Nianma saw his father come in with a bouquet of flowers, he felt a little embarrassed for him. Subconsciously, he did not look at him. After his mother threw the bouquet of flowers out, he climbed on his father's knee as if nothing had happened. He played with him and listened to him explain some spells and other things. His father was very knowledgeable. No matter how strange the questions little Myanmar asked, he could always answer them. Little Myanmar gained a lot of knowledge. Of course, he learned very quickly. In the short span of a month, even though he looked like a little bean, he was already able to use many spells that even immortals could not easily learn. Some things were most afraid of becoming a habit. Once it became a habit, it would be deeply ingrained. For example, when Shun Julie sent flowers, Imo threw them away happily, but it had become a habit. She was not used to him suddenly not sending flowers. Even little Myanmar was not used to it. He stretched his neck and waited for his father's arrival. They waited for almost half the morning, but Shun Julie never showed up. It was not good for a child to be cooped up in the house all the time. Imo would take little Myanmar out for a walk every day. Most of the time, they would go to the huge backyard of Mo Palace. Why didn't father come today? Little Myanmar repeated for the 8th time as he looked out of the window. Imo stood up and picked him up. Let's go for a walk. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the wind was warm. Shin Myanmar held his mother's arm tightly. Mother, I heard that the heavenly fire flower has bloomed. I want to go and see it. In the entire Mo Palace, the only place where the heavenly fire flower grew was in Shun Julie's courtyard next door. Imo knew what Shin Myanmar was thinking. The little guy missed his father and wanted to go there to see it. Imo smiled. She knew that there was a kind of pursuit in this world called playing hard to get. Chapter 1633. Perhaps this was what the Almighty wanted to do, but unfortunately, she did not fall for it. It didn't matter if he sent flowers or not. She wouldn't take it to heart. She patted Shin Myanmar's head and said, "Do you want to see the heavenly fire flowers? Let's go. Mother will take you somewhere else." Her magic power was now boundless. She simply pointed at an open space in the garden, and the heavenly fire flowers that originally grew in the courtyard emerged from the soil. In just a moment, there was a large patch of flowers. The red color looked very festive. Shin Myanmar looked at the large patch of flowers and was speechless. After a long time, he finally said, "Mother, I heard that this flower was planted in his courtyard by father. It is so red. I didn't know that father likes this kind of red color." He stared at Imo with his big eyes and said, "It is as red as mother's clothes." Imo looked at the clusters of heavenly fire flowers. Each of them was slim and elegant. When the breeze blew, they looked like dancing beauties. These flowers were teleported by her. In other words, these flowers were still Shun Julie's flowers. She did not change them. She put Shin Myanmar in front of the flowers and said, "Good boy. Don't you want to see them? Then take a good look." Shun Myanmar could only stand there and admire. His eyes were looking at the flowers, but he was still thinking of a way to trick his mother to go to his father's courtyard. He looked at them and suddenly shouted, "Mother, why are these flowers withered?" Imo looked at them and saw that the flowers had indeed begun to wither. The petals drooped as if they were not acclimatized to the environment. Some of the petals had already begun to wither. Imo frowned slightly. She had made the soil and water of this open space exactly the same as the courtyard. Why were these flowers dying? She did not know much about flowers and plants. After a while, she still could not figure out the reason. She was wondering if she should move these flowers back. Suddenly, a voice came from behind her. "What are you doing?" "Father." Shun Myanmar cheered and rushed toward the voice. Imo also slowly turned around and looked at Shin Julie, who had appeared behind her. Her voice was indifferent. "Your son wants to see the heavenly fire flowers, so I made them for him to see." Shun Julie's face was slightly pale. "You can take him to my courtyard to see." This was the first time in a month that he had spoken to her in such a heavy tone. Imo tilted his head and smiled. "I'm too lazy to go." Shun Julie looked down at her and said, "My courtyard is only one door away from yours. I'm as uninterested in your courtyard as I am in you." Imo was still smiling, but his words were poisonous. Shinjuli's face turned even paler. He pursed his thin lips and didn't say anything more. Instead, he turned around to look at the heavenly sparks. In less than an hour, more than half of the heavenly fire flowers had withered, leaving only half of their stamens. His fingers landed on the heavenly fire flowers, and his fingertips curled up slightly. It was clear that he was going to use a teleportation technique to teleport these flowers to his own courtyard. A faint light flashed in Amo's eyes as he suddenly waved his sleeve. A faint red light was emitted from her sleeve and directly turned into a hurricane that swept past the heavenly fire flowers. Then, all the heavenly fire flowers fell to the ground as if they had been burned by a fire. They were charred black and could no longer be seen. You... Shinjuli turned around abruptly. He was obviously angry. The wind from his sleeves made Amo's fiery red robe flutter in the wind. Amo raised her head to look at him, a glint flashing through her beautiful eyes. She looked at him fearlessly. What? Are you angry? Can't stand me anymore? If you can't stand it, you can choose to cancel the marriage. Chapter 1634. Shinjuli looked at her, and Amo looked back at him. Although she was short, her aura was strong, and there was a faint dark aura around her. Shinjuli slowly lowered his sleeves and said clearly, "No, I will not cancel the engagement." Amo's eyes flickered slightly, and she sneered. "Why? Are you reluctant to give up the position of the Devil Lord's husband?" Shinjuli's eyes were as calm as water. "I am just reluctant to give up the position of Amo's husband." He turned to look at the heavenly fire flowers as if he wanted to see if there was any hope to save them. Amo was speechless. She had an illusion that she had punched a pile of cotton. She was inexplicably anxious. No matter how she provoked this person, he did not lose his temper at her. He was so strong that she could not reject him. Unlike Yi Tianli would disappear for 2 days if she looked a little unwell. Shinjuli searched the pile of withered flowers for a long time and finally found a fish that had escaped the net. He carefully held it up. Amo clenched her fists in her sleeves. She did not understand why he treasured such a flower. However, since he liked it, she wanted to destroy it. She wanted to provoke him so that he would take the initiative to cancel the engagement. That way, she would not be considered as breaking her promise. She raised her finger and threw a fireball. She wanted to burn the only surviving seedling in Shinjuli's hand. Unexpectedly, Shinjuli was prepared this time. The heavenly fire flower in his palm disappeared instantly. Amo's fireball hit him, and his body swayed slightly. However, he stood still as if nothing had happened. He looked at her and said, "You guys go ahead." He turned and disappeared. Amo lowered her sleeves and suddenly felt a little dispirited. She looked down and saw Shun Nianma looking at her with his round eyes. She touched his little head and asked, "Little boy, where do you want to go?" "Mother, please don't bully father, okay?" Shun Nianma pulled her dress. "Father is so pitiful. He is bleeding." "Bleeding?" Amo frowned slightly. She did not see him bleeding. Perhaps she just glanced at him. She didn't even see his face clearly. However, this person was too abominable. If he was seriously injured, with his martial arts, he would be able to heal him easily. Why did she have to bleed for the child to see? The trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's sympathy. Nianma was still young, so she did not want to explain too much to the child. She did not know why, but she did not want to expose the dark side of her to the child at such an early age. Therefore, she blinked her eyes and carried Shin Nianma in her arms. "He is injured. Shall we go and see him?" Shin Nianma's eyes lit up. This was the first time that his mother had mentioned visiting his father. He immediately hugged her neck, afraid that she would go back on her words. Okay, mother, let's go now." Just now, he saw that his father's face was very pale, and there seemed to be blood stains on his back. Hermitage. This was where Shinjuli was currently living. The courtyard was very clean. There were mountain rocks and a flower bed in the courtyard. However, The flowers in the flower bed had disappeared, leaving only a bare land. Although this courtyard was close to Amo's palace, it was obviously for the servants. The house was relatively small, and the courtyard was not big. When Shun Julie first moved in, Amo had purposely pointed out a courtyard like this to him. She admitted that she wanted to humiliate him so that he would back out of the engagement. Chapter 1635. She did not expect him to move in without hesitation. Originally, a gardener from the Devil clan lived in the courtyard. The gardener was not a clean person, so the house he lived in was a little dirty and messy. When Shun Julie arrived, the gardener had just moved away. There was a suspicious smell of smelly feet in the house. Shun Julie used the cleansing spell 7 or 8 times to clean the house. Of course, the furniture inside was also destroyed by him and replaced with new ones. Amo had never been here before. It was her first time here. The moment she came in, her vision blurred for a moment. She felt that the layout of this place was somewhat familiar. Even the wind chimes under the eaves gave her a sense of déjà vu. She paused for a moment. Shun Julie was busy in the flower garden. He had just planted the only remaining heavenly fire flower. The flower's head was drooping, and she did not know if it could survive. His back was facing them, and she could clearly see that there was blood dripping out from his back. "Father, you are bleeding." Shun Yinma jumped down from her arms and ran toward Shun Julie. Shun Julie suddenly turned around. When he saw them, he subconsciously stepped back and covered the flower. Shun Yinma directly rushed into his arms. "Father, why are you injured? Which bastard did this to you? Tell me, and I will avenge you." He leaned his head toward his back and reached out his little hand to touch it. Shun Julie pulled his little hand down and said casually, "It is just a superficial injury. It is not a big deal." When he looked up, he saw Amo leaning against the door and looking at him lazily. Both of them looked at each other. Amo smiled. "It seems that you also have times when you are injured. You have lost a lot of blood. I think you may need to rest for a few days." Her words were both concerned and sarcastic. Shun Julie looked at her and did not speak. After all, Shun Yinma was still young. He thought that his mother finally began to care about his father. His little face suddenly showed a smile. "Father, you see, Mother also cares about you." The child's smile was too innocent and innocent. Imo paused. She originally wanted to mock Shun Julie a little more, but now she couldn't bring herself to do so. Little Myanmar was very sensible. He could feel the Cold War between the adults. The child was caught in the middle, so he tried his best to make them reconcile. Shun Julie sighed and rubbed the child's head. "Yes, father is very happy." Mo's gaze fell on the flowers behind him. "Your Excellency treasures these flowers very much." Shun Julie subconsciously covered the flower again. His eyes darkened. "Mo, don't ruin it again. I have a use for it." "Eh? What is it used for?" It was rare for Mo to be curious. "This, you will know in the future." Shun Julie hesitated for a moment. Mo yawned. "Forget it. Actually, I'm not interested in knowing. It's just a flower. It doesn't matter if I keep it in Mo Palace." Her eyes looked around the courtyard casually. Finally, her gaze fell on his hands. He had probably just finished planting the flowers, so there was still mud on his hands. It was rare to see him like this. In her eyes, he was always the kind of man who was dressed neatly with a tight collar. It was the first time she saw him so lively. She did not know why, but he had a trace of bleakness, which made her heart inexplicably tight. She did not like this feeling. She tilted her head and looked at him. Slowly, she walked over. "Let me see your injury." Chapter 1636. This was the first time she spoke to him in such a caring tone since they reunited. Shun Julie took a step back. "No need." Shun Yanma was anxious. He hugged his father's shoulder tightly. "Father, let Mother take a look at you." "Let her take a look." Mother's medical skills are also very good. Why did his father not seize this opportunity to be close to his mother? He was so anxious. Shun Julie had been facing her, so she could not see the wound on his back. Emma laughed. Are you playing hard to get again? I have been fooled. Since you don't want me to take a look, I will not take a look. Shun Julie was relieved. He handed the child to her. Take him out to play. I will take care of the wound myself. Just as he spoke, his vision blurred, and the red figure was gone. His facial expression changed slightly. When he was about to turn around, a cold hand had already touched his back. His body was slightly stiff. His fingers were slightly raised as if he wanted to do something, but he did not do it. In the time it took for him to pause, she had already hit his acupuncture point. The clothes on his back were rudely torn apart, and he could feel the slight chill in the air. He smiled bitterly. He had forgotten that she was now the Devil Master. Her kung fu should be similar to his. Shun Nianma also wanted to take a look at his father's injury, so he wanted to break free from his father's hand. However, his father held his little body tightly. He could not break free for a moment. He could not help but shout, "Father, look at Nianma. Look at Nianma. Let go of Nianma." Of course, Shun Julie would not let go. He was afraid that his son would see such a hideous wound. However, the little guy was struggling too hard. His acupuncture point was also hit, so he almost could not hold him. Mo's eyes fell on his back. There was a penetrating wound. It should be a sword wound. At this moment, the flesh near the wound was showing signs of decay. She could even see the bones inside. The wound was terrible. It was extremely stimulating to one's senses. With a flick of Mo's sleeve, Shun Julie's shirt automatically closed and covered the wound once more. Almost at the same time, Shun Julie's acupoints opened by themselves. He held the child, who almost fell to the ground, and dodged to the side. Mo had already moved to stand in front of him. She didn't say anything else, but there was a flash of light in her palm, and a small green bottle appeared. "Your Excellency, you can't heal yourself. I can help you this once, but I have a condition." Shun Julie looked at her with a faint smile. "Break off the engagement with you?" Mo.
How did he get it right?
"Yes, as long as you agree to break off the engagement, your wound will be healed immediately." Mo felt that her condition was very timely. She already knew that the wound on his back was the credit of her sky splitter. If the person who was injured by the sword did not get the special antidote, the wound would not be healed even if it did not hurt the vital parts. Instead, it would rot inch by inch. Not only would it corrode the body, but it would also corrode the soul. As long as the person was not dead, the body and soul would suffer in pain until the body and soul disappeared. At that time, she knew that Shun Julie was injured by her sword, but he had been fine. She thought that his medical skills had finally broken through the sky and could heal the wound of the sky splitter. She did not expect that it seemed that when he was with her, he would not be able to heal her. Chapter 1637. It seemed that when he was with her, he used a spell to cover up the wound.
Somehow it was exposed this time.
Perhaps this sword wound had finally corroded his strong soul and weakened it, so he could no longer hide it. This morning, he did not send her flowers again. This was the right time to ask for a condition. After a month of pain, he should have tasted the pain of his soul and body. Therefore, he should agree to cancel the engagement. When this person was in front of her, she always felt more and more impatient. She did not like this feeling very much. Emma looked at him with her bright eyes, hoping to get the word agree from his mouth. Unexpectedly, Shun Julie only looked at her and answered faintly, "No need." He turned and went into the house. Emma was speechless. She was so angry that she clenched her fists in her sleeves and suddenly sneered. Well, he was asking for it. It was not that she did not want to save him. When she looked down, she saw Shun Nianma standing by her feet and looking at her eagerly. When he saw her looking at him, he pursed his lips. "Mother, is the wound on father's back serious? Can you not ask for a condition to treat him? He has lost so much blood. It must be very painful." Emma was speechless. The little guy's eyes were too innocent, and there was a clear desire in them. This desire made Emo feel as if her heart was being pricked. She carried the child and said faintly, "It's okay. Since he doesn't want Mother to treat him, he must have his own way. I don't want to force him. Let's go. Mother will take you somewhere else to play." As she spoke, she strode out of the house. She did not want to stay in this house for a minute longer. Julie sat on the bed and lowered his eyes to practice. Of course, he knew the reason for his injury. He had to admit that the Sky Splitter sword was indeed an ancient, great demonic instrument. Its function was simply unbelievable. If an ordinary immortal was hit by such a sword, his flesh would definitely be destroyed within 3 days, and his soul would be scattered. Julie's physique had always been different from ordinary people. It was also not comparable to the celestial powers. He would not be easily injured. Even if he was injured, he could quickly heal. In addition to his superb martial arts and medical skills, there was no injury that could stop him. However, he did not expect to kick an iron plate under the Sky Splitter sword. In the past month, he had searched for all kinds of treatment methods, but all he could do was slow down the progression of the injury. He could not heal it quickly. He naturally knew that she definitely had the antidote, but he didn't want to ask her for it. He also understood that after she found out about his injuries, she would definitely threaten him with the antidote, forcing him to cancel the engagement. She would never understand how important this engagement was to him. What was important was that he was willing to risk his life for it. Originally, he had already controlled his injuries, but because of the adventure last night, he had suffered a claw attack from a demonic beast, which aggravated his injuries. Thus, he temporarily did not have the strength to cover up the sword wound and let the child see it. After meditating for a moment, he opened his eyes and pulled up his sleeves, revealing the wound on his shoulder. This wound was caused by a demonic beast. Although it looked dangerous, it was still within the scope of his treatment. He applied the medicine himself and bandaged himself with one hand. The only thing that gave him a headache was the wound on his back. It seemed that all the medicine he used was soil and stone. His gaze fell on the lonely, heavenly fire flower outside the window. He sighed softly. He did not know if this flower could come back to life. He could not help but ponder for a moment. Chapter 1638. As he was pondering, he suddenly sensed something and asked in a low voice, "Who's outside?" Someone had entered his courtyard. He put on his clothes and stood up. A delicate voice came from outside. "Master, I'm Xiangxiao. I've been ordered to serve you." "No need, get out." He loved cleanliness. Other than those two people, he didn't want anyone else to step foot in here. "Young master," the Devil Lord said that since young master is a guest here, you must have someone to serve you. When he heard that young master was injured, the Devil Lord was even more worried, so he sent this servant to serve young master well. The owner of the voice had already walked to the door. However, that was all she could do. Because in the next moment, a hurricane suddenly swirled around her, directly sweeping her up and blowing her away. With a bang, she slammed into a tree outside the courtyard, causing her to feel dizzy and almost spit out a mouthful of blood. "Xiangxiao." She staggered and got up. She felt as if all the bones in her body had fallen apart. Every time she moved, they would make cracking sounds. This time, she didn't dare to act rashly. It turned out that this cold and delicate guest's kung fu was so shocking. He didn't even show himself, but he had already sent her flying. If she went to provoke him again, she wouldn't have come out in such a state. She could only go back and report to the Devil Lord. Julie sat on the cloud bed. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and there was anger in his eyes. His fingers slowly clenched. He felt as if there was blood boiling in his chest, and he couldn't suppress it. Ever since he was injured, his self-control was slightly weaker than before. He was no longer as carefree as before. Now, he had an obsession, he had worries, he had fetters. Naturally, he also had anger when he was offended. She was really trying to challenge his limits. This damned sword wound on the sky regicide not only corroded the soul and body, it also had a poison that made people speechless. When it acted up, Not only did it cause pain all over his body, it also stimulated the lust in his body originally. He had been suppressing it and was able to endure it as if nothing had happened. Now, he couldn't suppress it anymore. While he was enduring the pain, he also had to endure the burning desire. The sky regicide sword was hers. She definitely knew the characteristics of this sword wound, and also knew how he would react. She just had to send a woman to serve him at this time. Did she really want to push him out that badly? She wanted to push him to another woman so badly. The piercing pain on his back came again. He closed his eyes and breathed heavily, silently adjusting his breathing. Emma was sitting in a pavilion in the back garden. She was slightly uneasy as she stared blankly at a cluster of flowers in the distance. The flowers were also red in color. They were canna flowers and were somewhat similar to the heavenly flame flower, but their effects were as different as heaven and earth. Canna was purely ornamental, while skyfire flower was a kind of miraculous medicine. Emma had studied the medicinal properties of this skyfire flower. It had a hallucinogenic effect, similar to poppy, but its medicinal properties were 100 times stronger than poppy. Ever since she knew that the sword wound on Shun Julie's back hadn't healed, she had been thinking about the effects of the heavenly fire flower. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of any use for his injury. The heavenly fire flower was not among the ingredients used to concoct the antidote to the heaven-destroying sword, so why did he treasure it so much? What was he going to do with it? Mother. Shin Nianma climbed onto her lap and waved his little hand in front of her eyes. Emo came back to his senses and realized that he seemed to have been lost in thought for a long time. Chapter 1639. Emo came back to her senses and realized that she seemed to have been lost in thought for a long time. She pursed her lips. It seemed that she had been thinking about his problem, his injury, and his flowers ever since she came out of the small courtyard.
She was not in a good state.
In the past 3 years, it was the first time that she could think about someone for so long. Why did you stop catching butterflies? Just now, this kid had been catching butterflies. Every time he caught one, she did not know how many butterflies were killed by him. Mother, you will definitely save father, right? Emma was speechless. She had been sitting here for less than 2 hours, but this brat had already muttered this sentence 8 times. Whenever he remembered it, he would run over and shake her knee and repeat it again. And every time, he would change his tune. He would say that his father really loved his mother very much. He would say that his father was seriously injured but still picked flowers for his mother. He would also say that his father was such a good person and his mother could not bear to see him suffer. He had too many reasons. She almost suspected that even when this kid was catching butterflies, his little brain was thinking about how to persuade her. Some of these reasons were almost laughable, but when they came from his mouth, coupled with the way he looked at her, the lethality was not ordinary. It almost made her waver. Just like now, Shun Nianma thought of an even better one. Mother, as long as you heal father's injury, I will be very, very obedient. I will not cry anymore, and will not bother you anymore. Imo could not help but sigh. She rubbed his head and said, Mother, didn't you send someone to take care of him? Don't worry, your father will not die. How could such a strong and powerful person die? But father is not willing to be taken care of. Shin Nianma wanted to say more, but a shadow flashed not far away. An enchanting woman came over and bowed at Amo's feet. Devil Master, I am useless. I did not complete the mission given by you. What do you mean? Amo looked at her messy hair and torn dress and asked. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Vanilla. Vanilla was a flirtatious demon. Her figure was extremely devilish, and her face was extremely seductive, especially those misty eyes and fiery lips.
She didn't need to speak.
Just by standing there, she was a scene that made men go crazy. What's more, her every frown and smile had a kind of bone-deep charm. As long as a man saw her, almost all of them would fall under her skirt. Steward Himu had found the herb according to Amo's request. Amo had been quite satisfied with it when he saw it, so He had sent her over to take care of Shinjuli. However, he did not expect her to return in less than 10 minutes, and in such a sorry state. Vanilla lowered her head. Young master didn't see Vanilla at all. He slapped me out before I even entered the room. How embarrassing. It was the first time she had been so embarrassed. Mo's eyes flashed, and he waved his hand to dismiss her. Mother, look. Father doesn't need anyone to serve him. His injury must be very serious. Shin Nianma took the opportunity to persuade her again. Mo stretched out a finger and pointed at his little mouth. Okay, you play by yourself. I am sleepy. Let's sleep for a while. She put Shin Nianma down and leaned against the pillar of the pavilion to take a nap. The sun shone on her body and left a shadow behind her. Gradually, she seemed to have fallen asleep. Her arms were lazily hanging down. Shin Nianma played on the grass for a while and then ran over. He stood there and looked up at his mother's sleeping face. Finally, his eyes fell on his mother's hanging sleeve. The green medicine bottle in the sleeve was faintly discernible. Chapter 1640. It was the medicine that could cure his father's injury. Shin Nianma could recognize the medicine. He moved closer and reached out his little hand to grab the medicine. The words that his father once told him rang in his mind. Nianma, you have to be a man in the future. There are some bad habits that you cannot have. One of the bad habits that his father listed was stealing. Was it considered stealing when he took the medicine from his mother's sleeve? Would his father not like it? Would his mother abandon him in a fit of anger? Shin Nianma was a little hesitant. He reached out his little hand and retracted it again. His mother's sleeves fluttered in the wind, gently patting his little face, causing his little heart to rise and fall and rise again. His mother was probably too tired from being entangled by him. He had been standing there for a long time, but she did not wake up. For the past few days, he had been sleeping with his mother. Moreover, he had to sleep in her embrace. His mother was not used to it at first. She would often push him away in her sleep. Occasionally, when he rolled out of her embrace, she would conveniently pull him back into her embrace to sleep. His mother's body seemed to be cold all the time, but every time she hugged him, her body would become warm. It made him feel very comfortable every time he nestled in her arms. When they slept together, he would occasionally turn over and talk in his sleep to wake his mother up. It was probably because his fever had left a psychological shadow in his mother's heart. Every time he turned over, every time he groaned, his mother would subconsciously touch his forehead. His mother looked cold and did not like to talk much, but she still loved him very much and raised him as her own son. He was her biological son. Otherwise, he would not simply call a woman his mother. He, Shin Nianma, was a very special person. At this moment, Shin Nianma's thoughts were a little scattered. He stared at his mother and did not know what to do. After all, this was his first time being a thief, so he could not bear to do it. After a moment of hesitation, his father's pale face and the blood on his back flashed in front of his eyes.
No.
Even if he had to be a thief, he had to save his father. Shin Nianma finally made up his mind. He rubbed his little hand on his little robe and slowly put his little hand into his mother's sleeve. He slowly held the medicine bottle and slowly retracted his hand. Very good. His mother didn't wake up from beginning to end. She slept peacefully, and her breathing was also so even. When Shin Nianma finally held the bottle tightly in his hand, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. He really stole it. After all, he was still a child, and this was his first time being a thief, so he couldn't help but feel nervous. He held his breath and slowly retreated step by step. As he was short, he accidentally tripped on a branch with his heel and made a cracking sound. Although he didn't trip, the sound of the branch breaking made his chest jump as if a rabbit had been thrown into it. He subconsciously looked at his mother. She was still sleeping while leaning against the railing. Her long eyelashes covered her face, and she looked as beautiful as a sleeping beauty. Shin Nianma broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, his mother did not wake up. This was great. It seemed like even the heavens wanted him to succeed in saving his father. Shin Myanmar did not dare to dawdle anymore. He turned around and ran. Although he was small, he ran quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had run out of the garden. Imo slowly opened his eyes and looked at the little figure that was running away. He slowly sat up, and the corners of his lips curled into a smile. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.